Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our November 7th Planning Board meeting. And I will call us to order. And I will begin by reading the roll call. John Christ, myself, present. Sue?
Here.
Phil?
Here.
Neil is not present. Mike?
Here.
Matt?
Present.
And alternates, Zach, Michael Bouchard is excused this evening, Brad,
Here.
Molly,
Here.
and Jason.
Here.
All right, so we are down one planning board member. Well, we're down a select board rep, which does not get replaced. But we are down a full planning board member who stepped down a month or so ago, Mark. And so I guess that's the next ranking member that's present, Brad. Oh, there you are. Like, where are you? You're right there. I know you're here somewhere. What's that?
He's the same spot every time.
He's over here sometimes. He used to be over there sometimes.
Last few times, I think I've been here.
Last year, anyway.
Anyway, it's all good.
I will seat you as a voting member this evening. Okay. Next up, we have a review of minutes, and remember, these are two separate reviews of minutes from October, both from October 17th, one for a regular meeting and one for our site visit at 5:30 before our regular meeting. I was going through these, and I'm not sure I caught everything in there, but one thing that caught my eye, on page 6 of the packet, or is it 6 of the packet or 6 of the minutes? One labeled 6. I think it's 6 of the minutes. The bottom of the first full paragraph, given the concerns, Chris reintegrates that implicant in approval. I believe that should be Chris reiterates that implicit.
Yep.
The typo, or a
Yeah.
autocorrect probably that went
Yeah.
awry. So nothing really substantive.
Yeah, no, that's good though.
Autocorrect going rogue.
Yeah.
I've got page 7, number 9. I believe there was a concern about potential for noise emanating from the site, and we left noise out.
Oh, yeah,
Not from that one.
good catch.
And in that same one, beach is spelled incorrectly. It's B-E-A-C-H.
Mm-hmm.
And then over on page 8, I thought the hours of operation were going to be 7 to 5, Monday through Saturday, and no Sundays. I know he expressed that he doesn't work Sundays, but I remember saying no Sundays.
Yeah.
And so that needs to be added there, and I'm hoping that would be on his conditions as well.
Oh,
It is in the, sorry, go ahead.
instead of implicitly, it says, are you looking at number 3 on page 8, that operating hours shall be?
Yep.
So it's implicit that Sunday is not, but you want to make it explicit that Sunday is not an operating day? Yeah, okay.
And so for that one, that's in the findings of fact. In the conditions, it does state 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Saturday. But yeah, we can add that back to the
I
fact.
really would prefer it be there, because if he sells it and someone else moves in, well, it doesn't say no Sundays.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
So, also implicit, we are looking at the regular meeting right now.
Yeah.
And we'll deal with the site visit separately.
As long as you're making edits, doing a find and replace on my last name and put a capital M in there.
Got it.
Oh, it made it into the minutes of the next one.
There's another grammatical error, just
Where'd you find it?
Page 3, maybe about a third of the way up. If Hiltz were to come back and purpose using the site for use just proposed instead of purpose.
Got it.
That's it. That's what I found, yeah.
You guys are all like breaking out your inner English teachers tonight.
14 lines up.
14 lines up.
14 lines up from the bottom of page 3.
That is helpful.
Yeah.
This is impressive.
Yeah. Propose, okay, I see it. Does anybody else have any?
Top of page 6. Chris gauges the current standing. Is that supposed to be a GAUGES?
Oh, yeah, probably.
That's my last one.
Nice.
Good catch.
Nothing else beyond that.
Yeah.
Judgment.
Probably the most thorough board in town.
I suspect there's some we missed, but I'm gonna move it, we approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
Any further discussion? Typos, nothing? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, so the minutes are approved of our regular meeting. And next on to the site visit minutes.
Is, I think Beach Hill again in the call to order. B-A-C-H?
No,
Is it E?
it's E,
Mhm.
like the tree.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Move to approve the minutes as written.
Second that motion.
What's that?
Second.
Okay.
Who got that? Matt got that? Pretty close.
Matt and Sue, I'm not sure who got it. You got it?
Any further discussion?
I have a, under number 3, site visit, 2, 3. I guess it's kind of the 4th paragraph, if you will. Hilt's engineer stated there was almost no chance of runoff going into the stream since the pond can accommodate a 100-year storm. I don't know if I just didn't get far enough down to the details about why there was almost 0%, like no chance of an overflow happening, and it had to do with the type of soil.
That was mentioned.
Okay,
And often site visit minutes are a little bit more truncated. So
Sure.
it's hard to keep up.
okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But it was mentioned. I don't know if you want to like put it in there.
I think what he was getting at is that the design, did not accommodate overflow in the 100-year storm. He said that it was capable of infiltrating that volume.
Right.
I was gonna say, I don't recall exactly what was said.
I do because I asked the question.
Yeah.
All right. So
Are you?
are we good as is then?
We're good as is.
Okay. Anything else? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, the minutes are approved as written, and with that, we have any public comments not related to the items on the agenda? Yeah? Identify yourself and make your comments.
Elaine Belkis, Beach Hill Road. I was part of the site walk for the Hiltz property
Yep.
a few weeks ago, and one of the conditions, you had said the site plan approval does not apply to uses other than vehicular sales and repair, such as but not limited to storage of earth materials or construction equipment, earth excavation or processing of earth materials. Part of that site walk, we did notice that all of those things were on his land. Does he have a deadline to remove those? Is he going to be required to remove those? Because they're not part of the vehicle sales or repair, but more or less his construction business?
I would say that would be
Something to bring to the select board. Enforcement.
potentially something to be, enforcement's the word I was looking for, thank you. It was slipping my mind for some reason. It's an enforcement issue which the planning board doesn't really deal with, although we might have someone here this evening who.
I wondered if we
Yeah,
might
we
get
have
to that.
spoken.
Okay.
And that was something neither one of us were familiar with. Is there any type of timeline for this?
I don't know, Joseph, do you have any thoughts on that question?
It's the question of whether there's a timeline
Timeline
to
for complying with only those uses being present if there's evidence that there might be other uses before the approval takes place.
Sure. So, in short, no, there's nothing specific contemplated by the zoning or site plan regulations. However, if uses are, if a property is in violation of a site plan approval or the zoning ordinance, there is a process for enforcing compliance with that. However, there's no specific procedure or timeline for those other, if it happens before or after. So that would be something that would be determined as a part of a code action, as part of an enforcement action.
Enforcement under whose jurisdiction?
The only one
Ultimately,
in
it's-
town.
I'm sorry?
The only one in town, the select board.
Ultimately, the select board, but you don't have to go directly to the select board.
So not the code enforcement, the select board.
He's the representative of the select board.
Okay,
Yeah.
so either or?
Ultimately, the power rests with the select board, but they've hired the code enforcement officer to do that, so,
Okay,
yeah.
Yeah.
He's empowered to do that as well.
so he has the power to do that at any point?
I'll speak to that.
Go ahead.
Please.
Tom Newcomb, Building Inspector and Code Compliance Officer. So this is a subject that actually Elaine and I talked about, and my position on this is that prior to issuing a certificate of occupancy for the property, that it would be a requirement that the parcel meet the requirements of the planning board's decision, so that I would look for those materials to be moved off-site prior to the certificate of occupancy. There are instances such as Mid-State Health where I issued a conditional certificate of occupancy where they have to meet one of the planning board requirements that they have not met regarding granting an easement for the parking lot to the town. That I see did not relate to the use of the property, so we arranged to do a conditional certificate of occupancy, but with this in lieu of the situation, I think that it should be cleared up prior to issuance of certificate of occupancy. So that's my position on it.
Can I ask a question?
You may. I have things to go on my own head, but yeah, go ahead.
While we're on other, excuse me, Tom?
Yes.
Mind if I ask you a question just in regards to conditional
Absolutely.
occupancy
Yes.
permits? Is that something that's time-bound on your end?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, to use the example again of Mid-State Health, so we've done extensive inspections and working with the people down there. However, there was an issue that had not been taken care of in the time frame since, in the basically 2 years since they came before this board, in terms of the memorization of and recording of an easement for parking. And so on October 31st, I issued a conditional certificate of occupancy with the deadline of December 31st. So gave them 60 days to clear that up.
Okay, so usually you have a practice of making that time-bound, so.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, just appreciate that clarification.
My question had to do with, so let's say someone has an open site plan that they're actively working on. And in that time, they decide to do a whole bunch of other stuff on the site before we're even thinking of a CO. Presumably, there's some kind of enforcement at that level before we get to the certificate of occupancy, if they're doing stuff that's out of bounds of what's needed for site prep or their uses that they've been allowed.
Yes, that is a potential, and I think we'd have to address it as it arises and look at the enforceability of it. My jurisdiction is enforcing the zoning code and the building code. So it's somewhat limited scope. So, but if a building permit is issued subject to meeting the requirements of this board, then that means that the certificate of occupancy won't get issued until those conditions are met.
So just as, not knowing all these definitions, a certificate of occupancy is granted after the building has been built and inspected by you, deemed safe, and then that's the certificate that then allows the business to function, since this is a business in this case, or a building to be
Yes,
dwelled in?
it allows the building to be occupied and used.
Okay,
And furthermore, a certificate of occupancy can be revoked
okay,
for various reasons.
thank you.
I'm thinking, given the broader jurisdiction of the select board in some cases, I know there have been concerns about this property, and if it is found that they are doing stuff beyond what's necessary for site work, it might be good to contact the town manager and/or select board to,
Request enforcement.
yeah, prior to and even like getting through the CO phase.
Yeah.
I have a site walk scheduled for tomorrow
Okay.
just to examine current conditions. They have not yet applied for a building permit.
Okay, thank you.
Something like you.
Any other public comments? Thank you for your comment. All right. Communications received, Joseph.
Yeah, there is a letter in the stack of paperwork that was received just today for the board that has to do with zoning, potential zoning amendments. And then we also received a memo from the Tenny Mountain team, that is the team behind the Tenny Mountain ski area, with some comments on the draft Tenny Mountain overlay zoning that was discussed by the board. So those are two communications, and then two further communications, and the ones that are specifically listed on the agenda, two memos from Tom Newcomb, the code officer, requesting planning board input on a couple of issues that have come up on his end.
Does anyone have an extra copy of the letter that we received today?
I'm reading it now.
I didn't get a copy of that, okay.
It's generally in support of zoning changes.
Okay, thank you.
in some
I'll leave it
cases.
between us. All right, so there's the memo about Tenny Mountain, there's this letter, and there was the stuff from Tom, right? Which we should probably, Tom, would you like to say a few words about your communications?
Again, Tom Newcomb, Building Inspector and Code Compliance Officer. I'd like to think this crowd is here to see me, but I know better. So, through Joseph to the board, I sent a couple of memos with some supporting documents regarding short-term rentals and accessory dwelling units. They are both subjects we've been having discussions with the town manager regarding, and he requested that I seek input from this board as to if any proposed, any changes might need to be made to zoning, or if you feel that what I'm proposing fits with your view of the zoning.
Okay.
So, do you have a preference which matter I start with, accessory dwelling units or short-term rentals?
I just, I don't. I just want to say one word before we start. So I think implicit in what you're saying is the planning board doesn't really have control over enforcement. So
Correct.
we're being asked for input. It is not really in the end our decision to make, but we can give our advice.
Yes, but not as much input in terms of enforcement, but more where you review and make recommendations for changing to zoning as to if you feel that changes to zoning need to be made, or also, in addition to that, do you feel that these are fitting with your view of the zoning? So it's not necessarily an enforcement issue.
Got it.
So, all right, if nobody has any preference, I'd like to start with short-term rentals, because I think that's the easiest subject to start with. So you have my memo regarding it. I also brought along about a dozen copies, and can send a PDF of it to Joseph, but I thought this might shed some additional light on it. It's from the New Hampshire Municipal Association. It's about explaining short-term rentals. I thought it might be helpful for the board.
Okay, thank you.
Will you pass those along, Mike? So, in short, we have a fair amount of short-term rentals in town. If you do a quick look at Airbnb, you'll find in excess of 30 of them. And they range from, homes, condominiums, rooms or suites, and there's actually one that is a tent platform that's off-grid in someone's yard. So they range quite a bit. This was brought to my attention because of a resident who was filed the complaint with me regarding problems with next-door neighbor and the guests that were using the property that would enter their yard. So in looking at it and working with Joseph on this, our zoning requires that basically in a residential use, that a residential use is defined as non-transient housing. And therefore, a short-term rental does not meet that definition and is in violation of our zoning. So Scott wanted me to bring it to this board to see if you feel that what we want to do from a policy standpoint as a town, do we want to keep the zoning as is that prohibits transient housing, or do we want to make changes to allow it? And then also, if we allow it, we need to look at some regulation of it, because in a sense, short-term rental is akin to a hotel. And these units are not inspected for life safety as they would with a hotel. They're not held to the same standards. So I am looking for input from this board as to whether you feel that a zoning change needs to be made to allow it. The town of Meredith, for example, they actually specifically have it in their zoning regarding short-term rentals. And they also require a special exception from the ZBA in order to do it. So right now, we're silent on it, other than defining residential use as non-transient.
So my own thought is, nothing is going to happen this zoning season, obviously, it's too late. But I think looking forward, it might be good to address short-term rentals more overtly in the zoning ordinance. Whatever it is we decide to allow them, not allow them, or have some more nuanced understanding of what they can be, it might be nice just to put it down in language in our zoning ordinance in a future year, like maybe next year. And I will also caution everyone that there have been like a bunch of court cases. And they've gone one way or another based on very nuanced language in the zoning ordinance. The good news is some of those court cases have happened now, so we have that precedent to actually look at, so we don't mess up in the same ways and we can succeed in the same ways that those who have been successful in regulating this have done. Conway was probably the most famous one that got a lot of attention, and got shot down because of the way, like, one definition was written very, anyway, I don't want to get into that, but I think it would be good to address. And for me personally, I mean, I mean, it's kind of like the chickens. Like once you actually like start to address it and regulate it, you can actually like regulate it and not just pretend like it is or is not happening. And until we address
The
it,
context of chickens may be lost on many people,
I'm
but for
sorry.
those of us on the board, we
I'm sorry.
understand.
There was this whole chicken thing that happened a couple of years ago. But anyway, never mind.
Oh, we'll be enforcing chickens right now.
Yeah. No, never mind. It was kind of fun a couple of years ago. But, I mean, me personally, until we do that, I would prefer to keep a lower profile on enforcement, except where it becomes an issue. Otherwise, not to really kind of go after it until we more straightforwardly define it. That would be my take. Again, it's not really this board's choice, but my opinion. But it would be nice to address it at some point, more
I
directly.
agree, especially from my standpoint, so I know which direction to enforce.
From my perspective, I mean, I think that my understanding, we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but my understanding is that, you know, whether it's enforceable or not, it's not currently allowed as an accessory use to residential. I mean, if somebody wanted to permit, you know, a site plan that was exclusively short-term rentals, like that would be a site plan, we could handle that. But I don't think it's currently allowed. I mean, we do allow accessory dwelling units on residential lots, but those are
Residential, which is not short-term rental.
right, not short-term rentals. So I think we should. I think you have the power, in my opinion. I think you have the authority to enforce our current regulations if we were to choose so. But I mean, John, you wanted to take a light hand on enforcement, but
I would take a light hand until we actually define it better. But
well,
I mean, currently,
but I think technically they could enforce it
Yeah,
as it
technically,
is,
of
and
course,
you could issue. I think the
absolutely.
select board could issue cease and desist to all of those operating short-term rentals.
You know, technically, we can't, you know, it's under the select board to enforce it.
Right.
It's just, unfortunately, just, we haven't caught up with, the zoning just hasn't caught up with it. And I'm in favor of
Yeah.
John's idea of,
I feel like we're kind of kicking a beehive here.
let's not kick a beehive, let's let it go for right now until we can get a clearer a clearer definition
We
of how
see
we want to enforce
we
it.
see the beehive.
Yeah.
We're considering kicking it.
I think
I don't want to kick the beehive.
to echo what you said, I think with the court cases, some of them actually coming to fruition now and final decision being made, we'll have some good precedents to actually look at this and write some good,
enforceable code.
some good zoning on it that works.
I mean, if the town were to enforce it, it might draw a lawsuit. I mean, but until that point, it's enforceable, right? Until there's a decision and
So
an
I'm-
appeal.
Oh, we
So-
got Mike.
Oh, sorry.
So-
Your hand up?
Yeah.
Sorry, Mike.
yeah,
I
Mike.
just wanted to add one comment to the discussion that this is getting more intense with the Airbnb. I actually have an
Right.
apartment for rent for year-round tenants. I got 2 calls from 2 separate people that would like to rent the apartment and then use the apartment for Airbnb. And I thought it was a joke at first. And, but it's happening. And
Arbitrage.
So they want to sublet it as an Airbnb? Oh,
they want to rent for me and then rent it on a nightly basis to others.
Oh.
What'd you say?
Why?
Just kidding.
So,
Sounds like a
it's-
nightmare.
yeah, it's coming.
Yes.
So I don't want to spend all, we have a lot of stuff to do tonight. I don't want to spend all night in this. Did you have a quick comment?
I do. I mean, Grace Garvey, resident of Texas Hill Road. My family actually has a property in a town that went through this whole process recently, this past year, and the planning board basically proposed that those people who want to do those short-term rentals have to go through an application process and an inspection process. This was a town in Wolfboro, right? So, I mean, the planning board was actually they actually implemented a set of guidelines for those things. So you can think about that in the future, but I think it's a problem here too. I think enforcement's maybe the next step, and then you guys get your chickens in a row.
Can I say one other thing?
One last thing.
So I appreciate, Grace, your comment reminded me of something I wanted to say earlier, which I appreciate that you brought up. This area is not a resort area. This is not Wolfboro. This is not Moultonboro. This, this community is already short on housing, and I think any homes that are used as short-term rentals could potentially be accessory dwelling units, and I think that this town needs those. So, I would be more in favor of enforcing the ban on short-term rentals, only in that it would give people who have the potential to create accessory dwelling units the ability to provide some affordable housing for people in need.
Not go too deep down in this.
Okay.
I want to hear what Sue has to
I
say.
know.
Okay,
Sue,
quick comment.
Be quick.
People own property, it's
Right.
theirs, they
Yeah.
pay taxes on that, so I think they should have the right to be able to do what they want. I do believe that if you're gonna be putting it out there as like a hotel room, I do think that when they apply, they should go through an application process. I do believe that they should get some type of an occupancy permit for this Airbnb, but to say that people can't do that with their own property, I don't like that type of restriction.
This sounds like a wonderful discussion to continue
So
next year.
that's why I backed off.
All right.
So, moving on.
So we do want to look at it.
We do.
Yes.
And in the meantime, it's not
Glad
really
you
up to
brought
us,
it up.
but,
Yeah.
and thank you for reminding us to look at it.
Yep.
Thank you for this document, too.
Yeah.
So moving on to accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units have been around for a bit. We've recently changed the zoning to make it more of a matter of right in some zoning districts. There's pros and cons to that. The pros is it makes it easier for people to be able to do that, but unfortunately, it's eliminated this board as a review. So what's happening is that things are getting missed. So the main issue that I'm running into, I've had 2 instances recently where they actually were people that had conditional use permits granted. One of them was for an absentee owner of a boarding house, which, in my opinion, does not meet the
Owner-occupied.
definition of a single-family home. And so they got the conditional use permit for the ADU. It was a detached ADU garage with the ADU above it. And they represented that they were going to be using either the primary residence or the ADU as their legal domicile, as is required. That was a complete misrepresentation. I learned of it mid-construction, and I informed them that they need to make other arrangements because I would not be issuing a certificate of occupancy because they did not meet those requirements.
Good.
So that's one side of it. Second side of it, which I'm seeing from talking with other officials, it's been a hot topic in the New Hampshire Building Officials Association discussion board, and that's that what happens down the road, because the RSA and our zoning requires that the unit, either the one of the 2 units, whether it's the ADU or the primary home, has to be the legal domicile going forward, not just at the time of issuance of the building permit. So what many communities are doing is requiring a affidavit that is notarized and recorded at the Registry of Deeds, so that it's in the chain of title, so that it binds future owners. So it puts them on record regarding it. So I would like to put that in place. Furthermore, there are also towns that are requiring an annual recertification, that every year the owner just signs a document that says, yes, this is my principal residence, and here is a copy of a document that proves it, whether it be a driver's license, voter registration, some legal document that shows that they actually do reside there. And the third document that I also provided, which is more of an administrative document, that's a checklist, which basically is a copy of the checklist that this board uses in evaluating the conditional use permit applications. So I just want to put that in place at my level when I'm reviewing building permits. But the main thing are the affidavit that goes on record at the Registry of Deeds, so it becomes part of the chain of title, puts future owners on record. Because what we want to prevent is that as properties change hands and the restrictions don't get passed on, and all of a sudden now we're having two family with 2 rental units, and it's not complying with our zoning and as well as state law.
So my own gut take on this is the affidavit acknowledging what's going on makes sense. I would want it to run it by legal review, because zoning does change sometimes, and make sure it doesn't like hang on too long and restrict people after zoning changes if it does change. But in principle, at least, it seems to make sense. I'm a little hesitant about an annual recertification and putting people through that for just one element in our zoning. We have a lot of things that people can break after they start living in their units. And to pick one of them out of all the other ones for reaffirmation every year, I'm not so sure about,
Okay.
personally.
Just a couple comments just to play devil's advocate. It's not just our zoning, but it's also, it's state law. So it's, and we're charged with enforcing it. But the other thing is, if you feel that it is too burdensome to ask for on an annual basis, it could be biannually, every 3 years.
Yeah.
So there are options.
What is the reason for that law, to have the owner on site?
It's basically, it's part of the state law when accessory dwelling unit law was adopted. The accessory dwelling unit law there are many requirements. There's a maximum size of the unit. And that can also be controlled by our zoning. The state just says we can't require it to be less than 750 square feet. But the purpose of the statute is to basically increase affordable housing stock by allowing a homeowner to be able to have an accessory dwelling, what people used to call an in-law apartment, but it's not restricted, and the town cannot restrict it to any family relation. So it could be used for a family relation, as most of them that this town is seeing are, but it also could be a rental unit. So it serves the purpose of being able to have an affordable unit or a small rental unit that increases our housing stock, yet it's not an end run around our zoning where suddenly every home in a single-family district can now be a 2-family rental. So that's the reasoning behind it.
My own thinking is, if there's a place where it becomes a problem and it's leading to problems because there's no oversight from the owner occupancy or whatever, you have this tool of enforcement and you use it. Otherwise, if it's not an issue, I'm not certain I want to track everyone down personally. But I couldn't defer to others.
I don't know, I mean, it's kind of, we've created these rules that are kind of hard to enforce, and, we're asking you to do this hard job, and you're asking for some tools to make it easier, but, yeah, I mean, those tools also come with impositions that, we didn't want to put into the zoning ordinance when we wrote it either, so, maybe it's just job security for you.
Well, but I guess to go to John's point, let's say,
Not easy, though.
let's say I want to, I want to check on
Yeah.
compliance. I have no teeth to be able to do that. I can ask people and they could say no. So without having the ability to be able to check on it, and enforceable ability, then I have no way to enforce it.
One thing, I mean, I don't know that ultimately this board really has a say in this anyway. So I think this is all advisory at this point, but.
Yes,
Mike?
it is that's, I'm
Yeah.
looking for input
Yeah.
to go back to Scott and ultimately to
I got
the
it.
Board of Selectmen.
So one thing that the planning board thought about was the process of going to the zoning board for their permit.
Mhm.
Are you having more problems in the residential zone where they do have to go in front of the zoning board, or is it more in the ag zone or somewhere else out of residential?
Well, frankly, the two instances that I've had problems with are ones that have both come before this board for conditional use permits.
Okay, so prior to the change.
Yes.
You know, it was, when I read your memo for the ADUs, it was shocking a little bit that upon your arriving at someone's site to inspect, or notifying them, hey, you know, these are the laws, and they're like, wait a minute, what do you mean? That was shocking to hear, that your first contact with some of these people is when they realize you need to be living here in either one. You need to be owner occupied, and you know, that was shocking to hear that. And I think having a checklist where someone signs off during application that they clearly know these are the guidelines that are looking to be met is important.
Well, and I agree. However, as I say, this checklist, I literally copied from this board's checklist. And in that particular instance where it's an absentee owner, I went back and looked at their application to this board.
Yep.
And on that checklist, they circled that they would be occupying.
So they did.
So at that time, they did.
So we could also revoke the conditional use permit. They're no longer meeting the conditions of the use, and it could be revoked.
Right, which is why I
Except
stated
it's
that they
now-
would
it's now
not be
in
getting
zoning that it's like
a,
allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the conditional use permits are kind of overruled now by the zoning.
but it's also why I informed them that they would not be getting a certificate of occupancy,
Yeah. Good.
you know, for the unit.
I-
And they stopped construction.
I mean, in part, it sounds like the fact that you caught this means in some ways the system's working.
Right.
Well, maybe in the
how-
short term, but the problem is what happens when someone legitimately gets an accessory dwelling unit. Working with one right now that they had a detached garage, that they received a conditional use permit from this board, and they are basically finishing the second floor of the garage to make it an ADU. Now, what happens when they sell the property and there are no restrictions on record for it? Then someone else can walk in and can, with no knowledge, they may say, oh, okay, I've got a two-family that I can rent out both units. And we can go in and try and enforce it, but they can also claim the defense of having no knowledge of it because there was nothing on record.
But there's, I mean, it's in the underlying zoning. You can always enforce zoning.
Well, this is also part of the goal of the affidavit that you mentioned.
Exactly.
And I mean, for me, that would be fine as long as it passes legal muster. And I would just want to make sure that, obviously, that, you know, it would work as intended.
I think, what's the difference between the affidavit and the zoning? Because
I think
someone
that-
say, hey, I didn't read the zoning.
I think that it would follow the property more directly.
Yeah,
Okay.
the affidavit would be like, because I get it with the deed, it's understanding like this comes up, whereas like, you know, if it's
Rather than-
not with the deed, if I start going down that road and don't look at the zoning, then I run into an issue.
You don't read the zoning when you move into town.
Guess what? People don't read their deeds either.
But, I mean, this is also a state, this is
But they have to sign off that they read deed, so
This
that,
is a
that's
statewide law. Anybody buying property in this town should be aware that accessory dwelling units, you know, require owner occupancy.
So
I
in
think
some,
these are all good ideas.
yeah,
Yeah, but the point is that somebody, you know, if you're a property buyer and you see a house that is a legitimate
Yeah.
two-family, but then you also see another property that has an accessory dwelling unit, and then you really can't know
Makes it great.
which is which.
And it's hard, because you're gonna have non-conforming uses that are being continued. And like, yeah, I mean, it is difficult.
Right, and I think that's what this is trying
I know.
to get at, is the purpose of the affidavit is to prevent this from becoming a non-conforming use.
Right. And Joseph, all someone needs to do to circumnavigate, say all these were put in place, all someone needs to do to circumnavigate an ADU is say, I need a conditional use permit because I'm putting a second house on my lot, because we do those now.
We don't do conditional use permits anymore. That was our
Or-
process before.
Or a second house,
That's a good point, yeah, so,
a second, not an ADU, a second house of any size.
yeah, that is true in the multiple buildings on a lot.
one
You could
lot.
apply under that section.
So it's
You
set,
don't need site plan review if it's still
Correct.
under two houses.
Don't need site plan review, but do need
Aggregate.
conditional use permit.
so it's sounding like most of us agree with the checklist being more explicit. Agree as long as it passes muster with the affidavit. And there seems to be some division perhaps over the yearly, bi-yearly, whatever it happens to be,
Recertification.
recertification, and that seems to be the less resolved for us. And I'm not sure we're gonna resolve that tonight, and ultimately, you can just come away saying, we're just indecision there, and we don't have a clear guidance perhaps.
No, and that's fine. That was my takeaway, is that you're fine with the first two.
Yep.
The second one is you're undecided on, and that's the takeaway that I can go to the Board of Selectmen on.
Yeah.
Are other towns, you mentioned other towns are using the affidavit successfully?
Yes, this particular affidavit, I literally copied from Keene.
Okay.
A lot of other towns are doing it. The annual certification, I agree that annual might be looked at as being burdensome, but there are other towns that are doing it. This particular document that I revised to fit Plymouth is almost carbon copy from Newmarket.
I mean, there are other annual burdens. I mean, people have to license dogs every year. If you have an accessory dwelling unit, like, it's not that hard to file a one-page affidavit.
So none of these ideas are unique to Plymouth,
Right.
because none of these problems are unique to Plymouth. And what's happening is that a lot of the communities we're learning about these as we go along, because as we experience the problems.
Right.
And so we want to tweak the methodology, the procedures going forward before it becomes a major problem.
What does happen with an affidavit recorded on someone's deed if zoning does change, and not just towns?
Well, this was the root of my question. I don't know the answer.
I'm not in support of the affidavit. I'm not against the affidavit, but I'm not in full support of it.
That was my legal question.
It's not like,
Yeah.
I think, I mean, I don't think it would be, I mean, like a right-of-way would be an encumbrance on a deed that would run indefinitely. But I think you'd have to be careful on how it was recorded as an attachment to the deed.
Well, one thing would be that it could be, we could have language in there that says, that references
Zoning.
the zoning,
Yeah.
which I believe it does, but we can say as amended, or as may be amended from time to
So
time.
it follows with the
Yeah.
zone.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking if the state says, hey, listen, instead of 62,000 units short, we're 162,000.
Yeah.
We're taking away the part of the statute that says you have to be owner occupied.
Yeah.
I almost, sorry.
No, so yeah, if it follows, that's great.
Yeah, so I think, yeah,
And I'm not,
that's,
and I'm not against, I just, something doesn't feel fully right, I'm like, feel.
There needs to be some language to account for
Yeah.
changes.
I think it's a great idea.
and that's why I'm here, is to get input, so,
Yep.
I'll
I'm generally
make
less
a note
supportive
on this.
of recording encumbrances on deeds. I would lean more towards, an annual affidavit, honestly. I don't think that's a big lift, and I think that it gives you the tools to enforce what you need without tying the registry of deeds in and, you know, affecting property transfers. I think that gets
Well,
messy.
Yeah, I understand your point, Phil. I guess the problem is that if
If a-
there's
if
no
a
actual,
buyer-
there's no actual notice given to the buyer, then they can claim that they have a hardship because they were intended to buy it as a two-family.
Yeah.
Whereas if the affidavit gets recorded, it's not as much an encumbrance as much as putting people on notice that this is the condition under which this property can be occupied.
Making sure they're informed.
Yeah.
Okay.
It does make it more complicated, for sure, if you were to transfer property without that, but at the same time, we are in a buyer beware, you know, environment where, you know, you should be knowing, you should know what's going on in the community that you're investing in. If there's a two-family home, you should know if it's, you know, a grandfathered use that can be continued, if it's, you know, if it's allowed currently under zoning. You know, I think that's,
I'll
Yeah,
just say-
unfortunately, that information isn't necessarily readily available. Sellers aren't being upfront with a lot of that information. Even the real estate agents aren't being made aware of it. I've had instances where we've had a property that came up for sale that I needed to inform the real estate agent that the house does not have certificate of occupancy, and ask them to inform buyers of that. I had a phone call the other day from somebody that just bought a piece of property, and they were not informed by the seller that there was a DES has an enforcement action in place on the property. So as much as it is a buyer beware environment, unfortunately, without a lot of these things being put on public record, then it's difficult for them to get that information.
I was going to say, I very much appreciate that you're coming to us for input here. And of course, I appreciate all the enforcement work.
Thank you.
And
I agree.
we haven't ironed everything out, I don't think, but
and-
hopefully
yeah.
this provides a little bit of guidance. And it's a lot for us to think about, like one meeting that's kind of even
Absolutely.
what we would do even.
Yeah.
Um,
So I'll be happy to come back if you want to discuss it further. I know you've got a full agenda tonight.
Yeah, I suspect a long meeting, yeah.
Yes. All right.
Thank you, I
Thank you
appreciate
so
your
much.
input.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night. All right. Reports of committees is up next on the agenda. I don't know if there's too much big happening, although CIP might have some quick words.
Budget Committee is meeting with department heads this week and next Friday is our last budget meeting, and so from after that, we will start doing the CIP meetings.
Perfect. Fantastic. All right. With that, next up on the agenda, we have new business, which includes two things: discussion of potential zoning amendments and discussion of the New Hampshire Housing Champions designation program, which it's been in the works for a little while, but the actual details have finally been announced in the past month or so, and we might want to just take a quick look at that and see what we think there. But we're not going to start there. So probably many of you are here this evening because of zoning amendments, and so we're going to get going with those now, and potential zoning amendments, I should say. And last time we got to the ag zone rather late, and so we're going to start with the ag zone tonight. And I said last time I would just flip the order. I didn't quite flip the order, but I did want to start with the ag zone first, which is why probably a lot of people are here, and do the Tenny Mountain overlay second, because it's also complicated, and we also have someone on the line, Judy Barrett, who's going to, probably on the line at this point, who's probably going to be helping us if we have any questions about some of the complicated language in there. And then get to some of the smaller amendments after that. So with that, I'm just going to say a few words to introduce the ag zone commercial use amendment, potential amendments. So we've heard quite a bit of input from many members of the community and residents in the ag zone over the past year or so about what can be done to protect residents from incompatible uses within the ag zone, uses that might not be desired next to, and might even be harmful next to a residential use. So implicit in this, of course, is that the planning board should do its duty to protect residents, which is part of our goal here, and protecting residents and their properties from adverse impacts. And that it sounds like many people have been telling us that they'd like to see some changes in the ag zone to protect them from some of these potentially adverse and incompatible uses. So what we've been looking at in that regard is the table of uses and what uses are allowed, not allowed, allowed by special exception and so forth in the ag zone, and looking at, if we do make those changes, how that we might redraw a few of the lines, especially around the Tenny Mountain Highway area, to still promote commercial development there, much of which on certain parts are still ag zone. So that's kind of where we're at. Couple of more words. Yeah, so our zoning, right? This is what a tool we use to shape development in the town, and other towns do this obviously as well. And it's also a tool to protect people from some of these adverse impacts and incompatible uses. Last meeting, we went through the table of uses, and thank you, Sue, for kind of leading that check by check by check journey through our list of commercial uses. And we changed some things around. We've taken, provisionally at least at this point, some things out of just outright permitted uses, and I think in only a few instances made them not permitted, and in several instances made them special exceptions. And so for those of you who are not in on all this planning jargon, a special exception means it's not permitted. But if you do want to do it, you can't just do it by right. You have to go to the zoning board and meet a certain set of criteria that say that are meant to protect from these sort of things we're talking about. So it's a kind of middle ground that puts another layer of protection in that doesn't say you can't do this, but at the very least, if you do it, we have to make sure everyone's protected. And it doesn't adversely impact the town, the residents, and so forth. So one last thing I wanted to mention. We had a conversation at our last work session about accessory uses to allowed uses. And I think this is really important to keep in mind, that some of these things could still be allowed as accessory uses to a primary, like for example, agricultural use. But it's also important to keep in mind that accessory uses, like there are limits on what's considered an accessory use. So you can't say like, I have a strawberry farm and like, I'm gonna build a hotel for people to go farming in the strawberry farm and say that's an accessory use to my strawberry farm. So there are limits in what we call accessory uses. It has to be typically an accessory use to that primary use and following scale of development and conventional couplings of uses and stuff like that. So I think there were a few instances in which I think we got a little bit carried away with accessory uses. Mm-hmm. With all that being said, I want to throw it back to the board for a few minutes and then open it up to the members of the public to comment on this. But first, among the board, do we have any further thoughts since our last meeting about where we're at?
So I had one thought after all the work we did to amend the table of uses. I had kind of neglected that if we look at page 15 of the package, in the middle of the page, there are the uses. There's that kind of short block of uses, and I guess my only concern is the topic of industrial use came up, mm-hmm. and I almost wonder if that should be prohibited in the ag zone without, if we prohibit it and allow it, if we prohibit it, it would still only be allowed by variance. But I don't necessarily think that, there can be some pretty intense uses under the field of industry, and the special exception criteria are actually fairly easy to meet in a lot of acts. But I was just curious, I wanted to discuss that to see if anybody else had concern about that.
You're on the PDF of that?
What's that?
You're on the PDF of that?
So in the packet, I was looking at, actually, sorry, it's page 26 in the
Okay.
packet.
Oh, there is a table on 15. Oh,
Yeah,
26 in the
zoning
packet.
the
ordinance.
zoning ordinance, page is 15. The
Yes,
packet
that's what it
number
was.
is, page number
26.
is 26.
Yeah, sorry.
I was considering this as well, and there's a part of me that says, oh, industrial use, in the typical way we define industrial use, I'd be happy to say no. And then there's a part of me that says, well, industrial uses can also can include some more like earth-based industrial uses, which I think also fall in that category. And this is where I might say special exception, maybe yes.
Okay.
And perhaps like for another day, like not this year, it might be interesting to think about industrial uses in a more nuanced way.
Yeah.
That actually separate
Yeah.
out those sort of things.
Right.
Where we could say no to this type of industry and special exception to this type of industry. But given where we are today with simply industry,
I mean,
I'm inclined to say maybe special exception, which is what we have right now.
I'm trying to find the definition in
Yeah,
the
thank
zoning
you.
ordinance as we're speaking about it. So,
Joseph, can you speak to this?
I have it here, that,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
industry is the assembly, manufacture, processing, packaging, or other operations to goods or materials. It's fairly
The processing
broad.
of materials, that
Fairly
could be
broad.
something that might not be terrible in the ag zone. With a special exception to protect residential areas.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. The other industrial definitions, I would be fine not allowing. Anybody, I don't know, this is just me personally, but. Mike?
Frank Miller brought up a good point at that meeting and said, and I believe he said scale.
Yeah.
And that made a lot of sense. Depending on how much it's going to affect the topography, I'd love to hear more from him when he gets a chance to talk about that.
Well, just one thing, Joseph, or anyone who has who has a zoning ordinance, like memorized in their brain, like cottage industry sort of stuff. That is also regulated in here.
So that could be a home occupation.
So home
Is
occupations,
different
which could
from
involve
industry.
manufacturing small things,
Yeah. Are allowed.
might not be industry, but home occupation, but there might be a level in between as well. Home occupation and full scale, like large industry.
When I read the definition of industry, I left off the last sentence, which said home occupations are excluded from industry. So,
Yeah.
there is allowance for, home, some forms of manufacturing that might be ancillary to your residential use in those zones.
Kind of vague. I mean,
Sure.
Is it industry that happens on your property that you live on?
Yes.
Yeah, home
That's what a
occupation.
home-based, that's a home business, just,
So you could have industry that may not be approved for your lot, but it would be approved because you live there.
And there are a list of restrictions on home occupations. So home occupations shall not occupy more than 20% of the floor area of the dwelling unit. Principal operator shall reside on premise and not employ more than one person who is not a member of the immediate family. Shall not include tea rooms, snack bars, restaurants, or similar establishments. There shall be no indication of the home occupation visible on the exterior of the building or on the lot except a permitted sign. Outdoor storage of materials or equipment shall be screened so as not to be visible from any public way, shoreline, or park. And the activity shall not produce noise, odor, traffic, or other nuisances perceptible at the lot line at a higher level than is usual in the surrounding neighborhood.
So there's some specific controls on if people are doing industry where they live.
Yeah.
Okay. I do think that industry, even when I hear the definition, still sounds quite vague, and I am interested in becoming more nuanced with what those things actually are. I am feeling quite protective and open to saying not permitted, but I do think that there's a more nuanced definition that we could be working with moving forward. Can I say something slightly unrelated, but still related?
Can I
to
just add to that for one second
Yes.
before you continue? This is part of why I was saying special exception now.
Yeah.
And this might be something to look at it another year and maybe get more nuanced about.
Yeah.
But just to get like a kind of like foot in the door and kind of thinking about this.
Yep.
Just leave it as a special exception and maybe get a little bit better head around it another year. It's it's incremental, these changes.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do it like crazy things all at once.
Yeah, I agree.
And to make some progress, I think would be helpful. And you wanted to say?
So what I'd like to say is that, to just be very clear, that the uses that we talked about in our October work meeting were exclusively the commercial uses, and that the other use tables that have to do with residential use, we did not talk about.
We did mention the industrial though. And that's
But
the only
we did
other.
mention industrial,
That's
but
the only other one we
other
mentioned,
one.
yeah.
And so all of those residential uses, we are not proposing any changes.
No.
Let me just,
Can I address that, on page 60 and 61 of the zoning ordinance, there are standards guiding the granting of special exceptions for specific uses. Number A is multiple unit dwellings, number B is industry, manufacturing, or industrial parks. I believe that those are the criteria. So, if we were to continue to allow special exceptions or industry in the ag zone by special exception, the criteria are listed on page 61. So it's, I can summarize them quickly. One is building design. All structures are designed with due consideration to existing and proposed neighborhood structures. 2, traffic access. 3, circulation and parking. 4 is landscaping. 5 is water and sewage. 6 is pollution. 7 is noise, and that's pretty specific. We talked about this generally in the last one, which is that noise level at the property line shall not exceed 70 decibels, and flashing and vibrations, objectionable flashing and vibrations shall not occur. So there are protections in the existing zoning as it's written, and if we wanted to move forward, we could see how that goes. But I still think, there are a lot of uses, industrial uses, that could meet those special exception criteria that I think many people would probably object to in the ag zone. And I think making it not allowed by special exception would force people to go for a variance, which has a little bit more teeth. It's a little bit harder standard to meet. And
Has a lot more teeth.
yeah, well, it's not that different, honestly.
So Phil, you're proposing not changing the industrial chart that we have now?
So
Sounds like he's proposing actually changing it.
I was proposing it, so for the sake of discussion, I want to say, I'm going to move that we change industrial use in the ag zone from special exception to not permitted. And I would wait for a second, or we can discuss it as is.
I'm not sure we need a motion necessarily at this point, but
Well, I mean, I think we have to vote on these things if we're making changes, because I do think we have to vote on them.
I think I agree with you in principle.
Yeah.
So
So
I also am willing to be flexible in the hopes of actually getting this passed.
no, that's fine. I think sometimes you have, it's your meeting to chair, and there's flexibility in how you do that. When I go to something that's tricky, I try to have a motion and a second,
Yep,
and
no,
then
that's fine.
discussion, and then we can either vote it up or down if we want to do that. But like that's me, and just because I make a motion, I don't
Actually,
expect it to go
and it's good
through.
to actually think about the timeline at this point. December, we can start our public hearings.
Right.
We could start them in December,
You don't
or
have
if the
to.
board wants to finalize its decisions
Yeah.
at the December meeting, the board could then schedule the public hearings. But yes,
Yeah.
Definitely motion second
could.
for scheduling public hearings. But yep, absolutely.
I mean, I can go either way in this one. I mean, I'm comfortable either way.
We can discuss. There's a motion on the table. If people want to talk about it, you can.
Anyone want to second the motion? Not permitted.
Sue, I know you have opinions. I'd love to hear yours.
I'm just waiting to hear what the audience has to
Yeah, I
say.
think we need, I think we're losing track and we need to
Well,
focus on
I don't
what
think we
we're-
can put this to the audience unless we have.
No, I just want to hear
consensus.
what they have to say overall.
Well,
Overall.
we do have a motion. Anybody want to,
Right.
what's that?
I said, right, we have a motion on the floor.
Does anybody want to second it or anything? No? Okay, fine.
Motion dies.
So, to go to our commercial uses, which are our more, our primary focus here, anybody have any thoughts about those changes? There have been a few that were taken out to be not permitted, including, says,
We took out,
Thank-
there's proposed
Yeah.
5 to be taken out.
the drive-through restaurant, drive-through service is taken out, the theater,
Bank.
Vehicular sales.
vehicular sales and repair, and the
Sexually
bank.
oriented business as well.
Bar, tavern, nightclub.
Oh, yes, 6. I missed that one.
It's
Thank you,
important.
Matt.
I'd like to hear from the public that's here.
Vehicular sales and repair.
Yes,
Can I,
yes.
the first one that says separate but not permitted for auto service station, I'm confused what that
This
means.
is where it divided to, we made, I think in the next
On the
page,
next, on the back, there's a, we separated out.
Oh,
fueling
thank you.
station and auto service
Definitions.
station.
Thank you. Yes, I remember that now.
Yeah,
Thank you.
separate. Yeah.
All right. Well, any comments about any of these, or do you want to hear from the public?
Public is fine.
Excited to hear
All
from
right.
the public.
So please come on up,
To hear.
identify yourself.
Grace Garvey and I actually live in the ag zone. And also, I don't know if you mentioned, but I know there's some letters in regard to the zoning changes that
Yes.
are in your packet as well.
Phil, if you want to, actually, Grace, if you want to speak first, and then maybe we can read a letter.
Your pleasure, sir. Okay. So I want to applaud you for finally taking steps towards doing this. In 2016, 17, before the 2018 master plan was written, we did a vetting process in this town, a number of sessions. It was facilitated. It was great. There were tons of residents there at those sessions. The master plan was based on those sessions, and a lot of what was outlined in the master plan was that folks wanted, as much as the ag zone has been the ag zone for forever, Plymouth is growing, and that there needed to be more definition to the ag zone and maybe some exceptions and non-permitted uses. So I want to applaud you. I 100% support this, and I appreciate your hard work in this, and I think it's a long time coming based on those sessions way back, and I think it was 16 and 17. So thank you. And that's all I have.
And thank you, and I thank you for reminding us that this didn't just come out of the blue. It did come out of all those sessions, and it's all enshrined in the master plan as something that the town agreed to want to do. So thank you, yeah.
Thank you.
You want to read a letter, Phil? Or summarize the letter?
I would say, why don't we, well, your call.
Hear from more people first?
I would be happy to hear from more people,
Okay.
and I can do this last
That's
if
fine.
if you want.
Frank?
Frank Miller, Town of Plymouth. First, I'll address the issue about industrial versus commercial. It's all scale, because all of your elements of mitigating your impact on any zone in any area of the town of Plymouth is based on your response to sight, sound, smell, ground vibration, groundwater quality, and safety. These are all coded items. There are 6 regulatory agencies: federal government, state government, municipal government, International Building Code, National Fire Protection Codes, and insurance codes. They all have their numerical rating codes and standards. Getting through that process is amazing. But anyway, looking at the list and misunderstanding of commercial use, you have a thing here, not allowing a lumber yard in the ag zone, which is like kind of productive to the whole purpose of the agricultural industry.
Lumber- Special exception.
That's the same. All right, so I grow trees called silviculturing, and one of the byproducts of that is lumber, okay? Now, I'm gonna be processing that lumber on site in bulk. Now, you want a 2x4, you go to Steve Rand. That is a commercial business selling 1 or 2 2x4s. Okay? Industrial grade is working in volume. Okay? And obviously, all of the issues with siting a lumber processing yard on a site goes through those items of mitigating those impacts on the environment. If you look at the intent and purpose of our zoning ordinance, the first part addresses the safety issues of the individual in a building. So your fire codes, your life safety codes, your sanitation codes, electrical codes, all those code systems deal with the structure. Now, below that is maintaining an value of our environment. Now you got a whole different list, your land use, okay? So you're not gonna find volume velocity index in a fire code. You will find it trying to comply with EPA, DES, and any code issue that's in our zoning ordinance, because that deals with different code systems, federal, state, municipal elements. So the trying to talk about a subject, you're not allowing yourself the joy of discovery of understanding the definitions of the terms that you're trying to mitigate and talk about and come up with reasonable, appropriate codes and standards for any one of these zones. And I might add, none of our zones have labels on them. You can't tell me, well, I know where they stop and start, but you can't tell me where village commercial stops and starts, agricultural, pick one. All right. The other thing is any piece of property that abuts a state highway, the first 200 feet of that is taxed as commercial, irregardless of use. Is assessed as having value because your property is maintained, the access is maintained by the state. Same thing goes with a municipal. So anyway, looking at the list here for this, we have one I always take exception to. We allowed in the village commercial zone truck terminal. We don't have enough real estate. If you want to turn a truck around, you got to go to the circle. Give me a break. But printing and photocopying, oh my God, special exception. Well, that's an innocuous phenomenon, and you can't tell me how many businesses are on Main Street that do it. Okay? So, like that was established back in 1961. A lot of those uses were political. Okay? A lot of our ordinances were politically motivated to try to prevent certain industries and agencies coming here. I do believe that you need to do a regulatory alignment review. Okay, I'm in the process working with as an engineer and having to go through using Word systems to check on the federal laws, state, municipal, and other code systems. I think you need to be aware of what, in terms of all those code systems, International Building Code, fire codes, whatever, in the glossary section has a term, technical and feasibility. That's where an agency establishes a code or standards that cannot be physically complied with. And I'll give you an example for the town.
Before we go too far, Frank, I just want to make sure we're sticking to.
I'm just talking, this is an overview of the process of trying to talk about various subjects of use in a particular zone. I'm saying the North American Institute Classification System just came online. I believe it's on, you can look it up online and get yourself acquainted with the vocabulary of the industry. So it helps you be able to understand what you're actually trying to do that won't be challenged in court. And I'll give you an example. Under parking, we have a parking system that for a single family house, minimum required spots are 2. However, you cannot have less than 125% of the minimum, which means you have to have 2.5 spots. But right below it says you cannot exceed 1.5%, so you can't have a 3rd spot. That has been challenged in court and has been deemed to be non-effective and no effect of law. And of course, we pay for that in the selectmen's legal budget. But really, to help us with the growth pattern, warehousing, truck terminal should be in the agricultural and/or the industrial place, because why? You're talking volume, large. You need big areas to turn those trucks around, park them, whatever. That industry requires industrial grade businesses and buildings. So I think you're trying to make a decision on something that you really haven't allowed yourself the joy of understanding the terminology that's currently used or what you're trying to use. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Oh, we just got schooled.
All right. Good evening.
Bruce Ahern, I live in Plymouth, in the Ag Zone. I was just looking at 6 of the items that you're changing. Start off with the drive-through restaurant and drive-through service. I would hate to see that go from permitted to not permitted. I know the Italian farmhouse would probably not have survived if they had not been able to do drive-through service during COVID. And yet you're not allowing any provisions for that. Then you've got an office for, which requires a special exception. I think there shouldn't be any problem with having a small office on a piece of property. What I think you need to, rather than going from permitted to a special exception, if you're going to do that, there should be a scale, a size scale. If it's just a small office, 1 or 2 cars a week that show up there, I don't think that should be required to go get a special exemption for it. Retail sales, a special exception. Does that mean that if a person has a farm, they can't have sales on their farm of their farm products? And then also, they may not have enough year-round to sell at their sales store, so they may bring in stuff like maple syrup from somebody else and other agricultural products that they want to sell. I don't think that you should have to get a special exception to have retail sales if you're dealing with agricultural stuff. Vehicle sales and repair, I don't think you should go to not permitted, from permitted to not permitted. Here again, it depends on the size. If a person has a farm, they have quite a bit of equipment that they need to service, but it doesn't have to be serviced every day. They need a place to service it. I don't see any problem with someone hiring someone to service their vehicles, but then when he's not busy, he could bring in, other people could bring in their vehicles to be serviced in that. I'm not talking about a big 6-bay service station, but a 1 or 2 bay repair place that is used mostly for, or mainly for the repair of the vehicles on the farm, but when it's not being used for that, it should be able to be used for repair of other vehicles to help a farmer survive in this industry. And the last one of those was the theater. I know during COVID, the Italian farmhouse had a outdoor screen. They allowed people to come and watch movies there. They weren't allowed to go to a movie theater, but so they put up a screen outdoors and allowed people to come. So I don't think it should be not permitted. Here again, it should be based on scale. And I use the Italian farmhouse because I'm familiar with it because it's near where I live. They've got a barn there that for that they have for special events. If they wanted to put up a screen in there and have movies in there once a night, once a week, something like that, where they show special movies, they can't do that with this. They should be permitted if it's not a huge, 8-screen movie theater. All this stuff that you're not permitting should be, rather than not permitting it, you can say a certain size or bigger, not permitted, but there should be an allowance for all of those things that have changed. There should be an allowance for it on a small scale. And just the last thing that I want to say is, I was here, I don't remember whether it was 2, 3, or 4 years ago, when you were trying to change the zoning in the ag zone to 3-acre lots.
We're not doing tonight.
I'm sorry?
Which we're not doing tonight.
You're not doing it tonight, but you're making changes to the ag zone that are not looking at the long-term or the total impact of what the changes are gonna be. And that needs to be considered before any of this stuff is done, is what is the total impact on it now and in the future. So,
If I can address a couple of those issues.
Okay.
I think some of what you described, I mean, two issues. One is the accessory use issue. Like having a farm stand with a farm would presumably be an acceptable accessory use to that farm. And there would be nothing preventing you from having a farm stand along with your farm to sell your goods. It would be more where the retail establishment was the primary use of that space. And I think that might go for a couple of these as well. The other thing I wanted to really kind of address is the issue of scale. And it's hard to make a whole, we talked a little bit about it already, it's hard to make a whole lot of definitions for different scales of development for the same use. To some extent you can do that sometimes. And this is where a special exception becomes really helpful, because we can say, if you do want a small office, you're probably going to breeze by the special exception. I don't know for sure, but probably you get through the special exception process pretty easily for like a small office. If you want to put up an office building, you're probably going to have a much harder time getting through the special exception process. And the zoning board would be able to use their personal judgment to, I think, address some of those issues that you're raising about scale, and allowing some of those smaller ones through with a special exception, and maybe not some of the big ones that might be more obtrusive to, neighbors and such.
there's 4 of those that just say not permitted. So you can't get a special exception for it if it's not permitted.
Well, the retail sales is special exception.
The office.
The office is special exception. The drive-through service and restaurant, I would imagine that for like a pandemic, exceptions can be made to some of this stuff. A lot of towns and municipalities and states made all kinds of exceptions during the pandemic for things that would not normally be allowed. I think the real concern there is, typically when you think of a drive-through restaurant, you're talking about a McDonald's or something, or a Dunkin' Donuts or Taco Bell.
Need some Taco Bell people. Aroma Joe's.
Or Aroma
Aroma
Joe's.
Joe's is a good
And you
example.
might not want that next to your house. And there's really, I would love anyone in the audience tonight or on the board to like define like what is the purpose of the ag zone, and does the purpose of the ag zone include Taco Bell and Aroma Joe's? And I'm not certain it does. I think it can include a restaurant with special exceptions for that. And if there's a pandemic or something, we probably can make all kinds of exceptions to just to like get on with life. But I'm not certain that what we typically consider and we typically see as a drive-through restaurant or service is what most of us, I think it sounds like, envision as what we like choose for our ag zone. I don't know. That's
Can we just carry on
Please.
with their comments?
yeah, absolutely.
Let them
absolutely. I'm
finish
sorry.
and then we can do.
I'm getting on the soapbox here. Other comments, please? Or questions, for that matter?
Was up at the back.
Yeah, I see.
I just like, I know one of the items on the list is establishing parking for residential or businesses or whatever.
That's a different amendment.
Okay. I just like to have you use whole numbers. It makes it very confusing to applicants and other people to understand the mechanics of figuring out parking. Man, I don't care what zone.
Walk to the State House. We'll get there though. Good evening.
Yes, good evening. I'm Dean Yetton up in West Plymouth. I guess I have to disagree with what you said. What is the ag zone? You know, well, the ag zone means a lot to all of us. And I don't know how long you've been around here, but I've been around here for 87 years. And we've been fighting some of this stuff for the last 25 years. And we'll continue to fight because you guys are trying to hurry this thing through. So I think probably that the best thing would be to let it go for another year and you get a little more insight what the ag zone is. You might like to come out to my farm and take a look. I got no cattle left, but we do a hell of a lot of hay and everything else. No, you've got to use a little common sense in your job. Thank you.
Thank you. And it really was meant as a genuine question. Like, I really want people to tell me what they think the ag zone is.
Claire McCann, Plymouth, New Hampshire. I would just like to state that it is my assumption that a lot of these changes are meant to protect what has been cherished. And I think there's an assumption that this is taking away from what is. And it seems pretty easy to either blatantly think of this as either one or the other. I do agree that scale is a concern, and as you've mentioned, that can be addressed in special exceptions. And for a couple of these, there might need to be a breakdown of what these categories mean. But ultimately, this is to protect the quality of the land and the use of the land for more either agricultural purposes, general protection purposes. So to say that these changes are somehow ruining what is, I don't think is an accurate position. What does ruin things is, I know as you mentioned, Mike, box stores. You keep mentioning box stores. That's retail. You know, if you only use examples of, well, what if someone wants to do a small farm stand? What if someone wants to do this? Then you should also be doing the opposite. What if someone wants to put a Target up on a hillside? What if someone wants to put a giant Walmart on a hillside? So the opposite is just as true as the small scale things. And to look at this as a restriction versus a possibility for protection is a missed opportunity. And I would encourage, if you are feeling that this is a threat, please also be willing to consider the other side and the positive aspects for the future, as has been mentioned. Looking in the long run, more people in general, more people wanting to come here, more business. You know, we live in a system of more. So what are we going to protect and how to protect it? And as there have been many good points about how to be thorough, how to be specific, but in the end, I do think these amendments are absolutely necessary if you want to maintain and preserve what you cherish. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions at this point?
Greg Netner, Claybrook Drive. I'm just curious how this list was composed or assembled and the groupings of some of these items, for instance, vehicular sales and repair, why those wouldn't be broken out, because they really, you could have just a guy running a repair shop and then you could have, you know, a lot of cars for sale. They're quite different.
Well, we also have auto service station, which is some overlap there. And many vehicular sales places do also do a lot of service. And I think that would be the kind of distinction there. But in terms of where these came from, these have been in our zoning ordinance for a long time. And it would be kind of onerous on us at this point to,
Rewrite
and
it.
potentially not wise at this point either, to just like wholesale in a few months, like rewrite our zoning ordinance and all of our uses. So we can do that piecemeal along the way, but as a kind of first step, taking what we do have and rethinking about what is and is not permitted, and to perhaps tweak our uses and definitions of uses might be a good idea, and I think we're starting to do that in places and continuing to do that in places, but we can't do too much of that in one time.
Okay.
So basically,
Yeah.
this is inherited.
Yeah, it didn't seem to me to maybe be an exhaustive list either.
Yeah,
Like, I was wondering what a trailer park would,
but that would be a residential use.
that would be residential, so that would be a different
Yeah, that
category.
would be like manufactured housing and residential use, and because of the way the law is written as a permissive law, if we don't explicitly permit it in the zoning ordinance, it's not permitted. So if you don't see it mentioned anywhere and you can't shove it into one of these categories somehow, it's not permitted.
Very good. All right, thank you.
You welcome. Thank you.
Is there anybody online?
So if, oh, you want
Please.
Regina Ronaldo, Plymouth resident, owner of Longview Farm. I'm just looking in the zoning ordinance, because I'm still becoming familiar with everything. Are all of these uses defined within the zoning ordinance? So each one of these has a definition for exactly like what it is.
They should be, hopefully.
Okay.
Not explicitly.
There are a few exceptions, so generally, the uses listed in the table of uses generally defined in Article 2 of the zoning.
There could be state
However,
law as well, or.
Yeah, sometimes, but generally, defined in Article 2 of the zoning, and there are some exceptions, though, Phil, like you said, that some things are not defined, so you just have to kind of assume in those cases that it's the common usage of that term, but by and large, the definition itself, kind of like we talked about with short-term rentals, in many ways, the way you define something is also a part of how that use is regulated in the zoning ordinance. So I guess all that is to say, the definitions are important.
Well said.
Okay. Yeah, good to know, just to kind of refer, like if you're looking at junkyard, like there's gonna be something that says like
That's also-
some kind of
some of these are-
guidelines for what that is.
Some of these are defined in RSAs too, in state RSAs.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
like
right,
junkyard.
so, I mean, that's very helpful in just like, just saying like, what does theater mean? Does it mean just like pulling down a screen, or does it actually mean like a sit-down, like multi-room, big,
Yeah.
giant place? And then I guess I just also wanted to ask if I'm looking at page 2 in the zoning ordinance, term definitions, and the word agriculture, is that what we're using as a definition for what is the agricultural zone? Okay,
The
I'd
agriculture,
like-
it's a specific use,
okay,
which is allowed in the agricultural zone. And this is part of where my question about like, what is the actual intent or purpose of the ag zone comes into play, because it does go beyond just agriculture.
so is
Including,
there a
like,
place in
rural
the zoning
residential sort of
ordinance
uses
that
and-
explains agricultural zone, like as a definition?
So our zones currently do not have definitions.
Okay,
And many zoning ordinances do give definitions for their zones, ours does not. And there's potentially a story to tell there that we don't want to get into tonight and it's long. But we do not have definitions for our zones.
all right, this was just informational questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, the zones can be somewhat defined by what's allowed in the use tables, and we're proposing to change those use tables.
But there can be an intent statement in some zoning ordinances.
Yeah, I agree, and I know that that was one of the things that was recommended that we add to our zoning ordinance in the review by our consultant.
Mike?
So I'd like to take a stab at what is the ag zone. It is, I think it's obviously growing things, selling things as Regina does, that you're growing, other things added in, food truck, I think that's great. Having an office there, having equipment on your farm, the smells that go along with it, fertilizers, natural fertilizers that may have a little bit more smell than something that's produced with chemicals. But Plymouth has a long history of agriculture. It was not an industrial base. It doesn't have a lot of huge brick buildings. What it does have is the people, and it's the people that define the ag zone more than exactly what they're doing. But in town, we had a zone called residential. And we protected that residential zone because we didn't want other things going on that would affect the normal day-to-day uses of a home. So we made residential. Then we made an area for commercial, industrial. But a lot of times, businesses that want to, let me explain another way. Farmers, it's about the people. And those farmers had incredible talent. Some of them could weld. And they couldn't afford to buy a piece of land in the commercial zone because that's the only place where you can do welding or industrial zone. They did it at their farm. And that was the beginning of a welding business that might have employed 10 or 15 people. Some of the farmers were very good at repairing equipment. So equipment repair places would pop up that they could put next to their farm or on their 70 acres or 200 acres. Some of them noticed the need for equipment sales, whether it's sales of haying equipment or farming equipment, or then became car sales, and maybe it was a small operation that they could not afford to go to the industrial zone or commercial zone to afford the taxes there. And likewise, the residents who lived in the residential zone would not want to go to the commercial zone where it might be very expensive. They take their car to the ag zone to get repaired because they're going to pay a small business owner his costs, which they don't want to go to the commercial dealership, which might cost a whole lot more. Some farmers had a tourist home. Bruce and my grandparents had a tourist home at the farm, and people would come in from the city to experience farm life. We also had a tourist home where we rented areas for the folks that were building Route 3 at the time. We also had a store right in the front lawn for the folks that were building the road or residents. So there was also chainsaw repair that farmers could use their skills to. And it's not, and maybe we employed 5 or 10 individuals, but it wasn't something that we could afford to go to the industrial or the commercial zone to pay those taxes. And there were a whole lot more businesses that farmers could relate to. And the main thing is equipment. Farmers were very good at running equipment, which translates to equipment that maybe put your driveway in, or maybe put your septic system in, or maybe built your house. All these skills, you don't go to the commercial and industrial sections of your town to go see about having your house built or your driveway put in, because the cost to put that business into those zones just doesn't work. Some of the best restaurants and best hotels, you're not gonna find in the commercial and industrial, because the only people that can afford that are the stores, are the restaurants that are all over New England or the East Coast. They can afford, they have the resources to buy a spot in the commercial or industrial zone. Some of the most quaint, best restaurants that you've probably ever been to were not in the commercial and industrial zones. They were out like the Common Man, or out in the middle of nowhere that no one maybe even knows about, with 50, 60 car parking lot. There's all those things. And for this board to sit here and say, we want this only here, it's scary. It's gonna cost the residents more money. In the ag zones, they were frugal people. They had skills that you were beyond what you and I have. Some of us here probably have some of those skills. But this is stifling, I feel, some of the taking away the uses is stifling our community. When you go up and down Route 3, which is all agriculture, you see tractor trailers, and you see burning of wood chips. You see all these different uses, and you see restaurants. That's what the ag zone is all about. All the farmers that have all these different skills that wants to apply them and be able to make a living, because farming is not easy. You don't make a lot of money farming. It's a lot of other things that you probably do besides that, isn't it? It is for me too. And we're stifling it. And we're trying to pigeonhole all these businesses where we want. And it's going to come back to bite us. And I'm really concerned about this, very concerned.
Thank you, Mike, for articulating that. You did a good job articulating that. And I think this is where it's also important to keep in mind that other opposite scale of development. And I think this is where the special exception becomes a really powerful tool. A lot of those things you're talking about, like a restaurant, retail sales, at the scale you're talking about, would be allowed by a special exception. However, when Target, let's go back to that one again, wants to move in the middle of the ag zone because it's a cheap piece of property there, and we're seeing more concerns about this sort of thing, then the special exception might be able to block that, but allow your small business that's not really going to harm your neighbors. And I think the special exception is a really powerful tool. The zoning board has encouraged us to use it more. And I think this is a great opportunity for it, because you do mention some really legitimate businesses that we can have in the ag zone. I totally agree. And at the same time, by just putting the P next to it, allowing it to be permitted, a permitted use, you're also saying those other businesses which fall in that category that we might not want to see in the middle of the ag zone. And we've certainly heard from many residents that they don't want to see them in the middle of the ag zone. Then the zoning board can come in and say, you know, this doesn't meet our criteria. This is going to be disruptive to the character of the ag zone, to all the things you cherish in the ag zone. But then when that small business wants to come in, then go ahead, you know. That seems to fit the character that you're describing.
I think it's going to take a lot more time to go through this.
We've been talking about this for years.
It's been a lot of short-sighted and reactionary. Like when we wanted to change the ag zone, someone mentioned a few years back, it was 3 acres zoning, and now we're away from that, and now we're talking about something. It's a lot of reactionary, and I think that if we put some thought into it, we could make some very beneficial changes, rather than what I see here, the first stab, concerns me quite a bit.
Mike.
Can we just finish the public hearing first?
Yeah, one second. Yeah. Well, it's not officially a public hearing.
Oh, sorry.
Just
not
allowing the public to speak. I've heard this before, where you say if we can just put this off for 1 year, and it's always one more year. And if you have something that you've put thought in as a resident of the ag zone that could help us fix this and address everybody's concerns as someone who lives there, I would have expected to have seen it by now. And I haven't heard any solutions from you, except as keeping it as it is.
I would like
And
to
the
state-
public is really concerned, from what we've heard, with how it is right now.
I would like to state that in 2021, when you made the same comment, Steve Whitman said, "Are you willing to come back and do this next year?" And you said, "I will." And here we are, 2 years after that, and you're still dragging your feet on this. I'm going to say, I would like to respond to some of the things you said. You make the claim that these uses are going to prevent people on farms from fixing tractors or welding or fixing their own cars. Like, I do that in the single family zone, two houses away from Dean's son. Has he ever said anything to you about anybody in the single family zone doing the? Nobody's going to complain about that. That's not what this is about. That's not what this is about. This is about preventing major uses, permitting Target, not stopping a farm stand from selling their produce. And nothing in this says that those ancillary uses are going to be prohibited.
And some of those businesses may develop into 10 or 15 employees.
And that's great. Let them permit a new facility somewhere and file a site plan. That's great. I'll encourage it. I'll be happy to review it and approve it.
And as far as a few years ago, yeah, I was here, I joined the planning board, and we discussed it, and we felt that 3-acre zoning didn't make sense. In fact.
And we pulled it.
We did, we pulled it. And in fact, in some cases where there's water and sewer, we allowed a slightly smaller lot, 40,000 square foot versus 43,560 square foot. So I have been, actually Matt and Sue also.
Mm-hmm.
So we became part of the discussion, and I don't know if you want to change your comment, but we did come back.
I stand by my comment.
We did come back, and
I would be happy to pull the minutes and show and refer to what you said in that meeting if you'd like. I'm not saying.
And then also, I said, if you want to make changes to the ag zone, let's get in front of the ag zone members that live there prior to coming up, and that's what we're doing now, and that's what I brought in.
Thank you.
Members of the ag zone, so that we can hear them before we do proposed changes. So what I said is actually what's happening.
And that was also part of the master planning process almost 10 years ago.
I think there's people here waiting to
Yes.
speak.
It's only one person.
Please.
Dean?
No, go for it. Please.
I just want to reiterate that we can't stand many more taxes. Right now, I'm paying over $2,200 a month for taxes. It's not your fault with the buildings we have and the haying we try to do and try to bring in some money, like Mike says, to keep this stuff going. But I don't know how long anybody can keep it going. Now, the town sewer goes right by my house, and I allowed when my mother was alive, we allowed the people to go through the water and sewer to go through our field, so they wouldn't have to dig up the road because it's a corduroy road, and you don't know what that is. But anyway, we went through this for the last 25 years. We want to keep it the way it is. You've got so many X's and SEs there that's really a pain in my, you know what. So,
Yeah. The chair.
No, he
gave me permission. So, you're in the ag zone, correct, sir?
yep.
So, let's say the property next to you wanted to build a hotel there. Let's say a 20-room hotel. Would you want that to happen?
If that's what it's going to take to keep everything going, yes, I wouldn't bother at all, but they're not going to build it next to me because I own all the land.
Okay. So, but I mean, I think part of this comes to, as John was talking about, right now that, a hotel is permitted
Right,
without having to,
right.
get any special permission. And so what we're trying to do is preserve that, like you've talked about, allow you to continue what you're doing without people, large chains, as been talked about, come in and disrupt that. None of this, as we've talked about, is meant to, prohibit small, farmer doing their businesses. And if it does grow and be successful, well, then they can look at providing getting a different location to provide that service because they have been successful. Like what's been said before, like I know part of this came about because we had that hotel possible development going in at Smithbridge Road. Now, no one really wanted that to happen. But unfortunately, it was permitted, and there was not much we could do to stop that. Making these changes will allow us, especially with the special exception, for people to come in and say, I want to be able to do this, and we can look at that and say, that's not saying with the character that you would desire. We're not trying to inhibit the farmers from doing the businesses that they want to do, and if those businesses turn out to be successful, then they need to find a place for it to be truly successful where it's permitted. But we also want to preserve what you want done, and right now we can't do that with all these Ps on here.
Well, I guess probably you have a point, but my point is, we fought this before, and we will fight it again. You guys,
What in particular are you fighting?
planning board that doesn't know what the hell they're doing except for a few people on it.
So you would be okay with a vehicular sales and repair, like a Ford dealership going in the location?
Yeah, I got a big truck garage, and I don't live too far from you. But anyway, that's part of the ag, way the ag goes. But you got to pay the taxes, otherwise the town of Plymouth. Right now, I guess you could call it I'm renting from the town of Plymouth, right? But, so, all right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Regina Ronaldo again. Okay. I have a couple of things going through my mind, but I also wanted to kind of bring up the sort of the most recent things that happened on this board with the application that came through with the hotel and that particular piece of property, and kind of speak to the idea of farming in general in this area. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Having, different kinds of farming businesses, whether it's wood, hay, vegetables, animals, those things do exist. But on, mostly in our area on a pretty small scale, I'd say even our farm, though it's servicing all of our surrounding towns, in the scheme of a farm, is pretty small to some of the other farms that are in the state. And also just to speak to the state of agriculture and farming in New Hampshire, I wouldn't say it's necessarily suffering, but it's not growing at a major steady rate. There's not people coming to find property or even be able to afford property in this state to actually have a farm. Even if they had experience farming, they couldn't do it. So to speak specifically to that piece on Smith Bridge that has been farmed in the past, has been hayed when it wasn't maybe necessarily an active farm, or however it was farmed in the past, is over $2 million. Someone's not going to be able to afford, if they wanted to have a strawberry farm, let's say, unless they are, coming from some amazing backing, they're not going to be able to afford that piece of property. And so there were many reasons that people were coming from the public to, sort of disagree with that application. I think ultimately this board, the majority, the only thing that they had the backing was the safety reasons, but there was many people from the community who were saying, this is not the kind of thing I would like to see on a beautiful piece of property that goes along an amazing stretch of the Baker River. And so if that's not what we want to see, we need to find out what is it that will protect that, because someone's not going to have over $2 million to be able to come to just hay that property or put sheep on it. There are not people moving to this area to do agriculture in that way. I mean, if there are, please tell me. I'd love to make some more farming friends down the road. I wouldn't mind if there was a strawberry farm down the road. That'd be awesome. I'd sell their strawberries at our stand. But I just kind of want to make that point, like if, and to speak to what was kind of said before, it's about cherishing what is already there, and protecting it, not so much inhibiting what can be done, currently.
Thank you.
It's Bruce Ahern again. I would request that all these X's that have changed from permitted to X's should be changed at least to a special exception. I mean, to be totally prohibited, to me, is not right. I know a lot of people, especially the people that live in town or in subdivisions, they think of the agricultural zone as this beautiful rural vista that they like to look at as they're driving around. The problem is the people that own those farms have to be able to afford the taxes on them, and the only way they can do that is to have some sort of business there. They can't make it just on farming. They have to have the flexibility to do other things with their land. If you want to continue to maintain the vistas, come up with the money to buy the land rather than restricting the farmers from doing what's necessary to maintain their properties. You can't ask the farmer to maintain this vista for you. It's just not possible for the farms to continue to be maintained that way. So I think you need to allow a lot more in the agriculture zone than what you're actually proposing right now.
Can I ask a question of the?
Go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What exactly in these changes is going to prevent a farmer from operating a business?
Well,
I don't believe any of these changes are going to prevent any of the support or ancillary services that farmers rely on to get
they
by.
might want, as I told you about a theater. Say I have a farm and I want to put an outdoor theater somewhere where it's not going to interfere with anybody else, and have people come and show movies.
That would be a site plan for a drive-in.
The theater one keeps coming up.
Well,
If it comes down to
saying,
it, I'm fine making that a special exception. I don't really.
Yeah,
but a drive-through restaurant, or drive-through, I'm not sure what a drive-through service is, as far as the definition. I didn't get a chance to look that up.
Oil change business could be like Prompto oil change or Valvoline. Like those are drive-through services.
But if a farmer has enough equipment that he hires somebody to service his equipment because he's not good at servicing equipment on his farm, he hires somebody to do that and sets up a spot in a building for him to service it. He's not going to do that all the time. And then he's going to have this bay that he's paying taxes on that's not being used for months at a time, that he could have this person that he's hired in there servicing other people's vehicles.
Every one of my friends' farms that I grew up with had a bay like that sitting empty when they weren't using it on their farm. Like, I don't know anybody who did oil changes on the side on their farm. They were out farming.
But if
you want to have a business for oil changes, permit it. That's fine. Like, ancillary services, like that's
you
not,
can't, it
that's not
says
what-
it's prohibited.
This is no, it doesn't. An oil change, a drive-through service is prohibited. It doesn't mean you can't change the oil on your tractor on your farm.
No, but what I'm saying is, say I have 50 farm vehicles that need service. It doesn't take 365 days to service those vehicles. So I've got one or two bays in a garage or pole barn, that it would be nice if I have hired a guy, or I have a guy that's willing to work on my equipment, if he can also work on other people's equipment at the same time in that pole barn.
That is exactly what we just approved in the last site plan that we had here.
But you're saying
Is
it's
it not?
prohibited.
Is that not what was permitted for
Vehicular sales and repair is an X in.
but that was.
That was the change, that's a
No, the
change, though, it
Beach Hill
wasn't
Road
that.
No, it
site
wasn't
plan
change,
we
it's
just
a change.
approved
That's-
was for a guy who who services his own equipment and wants to have the ability to service other people's. Like, that's what you're describing. We just permitted it. Like,
But in this
But
case,
you're
we actually
changing it to an X,
Now
which
we're
is not
changing it out.
permitted. That's what I'm
we are.
saying.
We are.
It's not permanent.
Right. Like, the reason that we're changing it to an X is because a lot of the people in the residential neighborhood next door did not want to see it there. And we don't have the ability to say no unless if it's permitted. Like, if somebody brings us a site plan, we basically, if they check the boxes and meet the site plan criteria, we have to allow that use there.
Can I?
You put an X there, Phil, and it can't happen anymore. in the
No, well, I mean, it can happen with variance.
Not easily.
Not easy, no. Yeah.
Okay,
Can I go, wait, can I just make an aside? It's currently 8:40, and we have several other amendments to look at. And I just want to turn this over to Joseph for a second. In terms of timeline, we customarily have 2 public hearings. And let's say we continue this discussion in December, not yet as a public hearing. Would we still have time on the calendar to have our business meetings and 2 public hearings?
Yes, so the last day per statute to hold the first public hearing is January 20th, so theoretically, the first work session could be the the first public hearing could be the January work session, and then the last day to hold the final public hearing is February 3rd, so you would have to look at the public hearings being at the beginning of February or through January, but
February, our first planning board meeting in February is on the 6th.
Yeah, so that wouldn't work. You'd have to either schedule a special meeting or have it at the business meeting in January.
Okay. And it sounds like we have other applications already coming through that might not be a single meeting. So, given all of that, how do we, Jason?
I mean, we're hearing from the public in the ag zone.
Mhm.
Then I think the best thing for us to do would be just to make all these special exception, so that way we can, if businesses want to come in, they can come in and present their cases, and we can permit them on the special exceptions as wanted.
Can we let's just go through for a second. I want to go through these one by one, and actually, go ahead first.
No, I think you've heard other perspectives as well.
Yeah.
And, my observation is, I've only been here for 14 years, I have family that lived in Wolfboro since the 1800s, so I get it, your families have been here a long time. How many people lived here in the 60s? Mike?
More than now.
No.
No. I mean, I think the idea is that we're growing and we're trying to preserve the reason why people are coming here. And I get it. I would hate to see a Target in Mr. Yaton's field on Yaton Road. I mean, I just would hate to see that. But, maybe, I don't know. I would not want to change these categories personally as someone who owns 2 properties in the ag zone. I'm just going to state it again.
Yes.
A lot of this, I understand everybody's point of view. I really do. There's a part of me that 100% yes, and there's a part of me on different levels. I do have a problem with the box store in certain parts of the town. I get that. I wouldn't want to see a huge Walmart in Mr. Yetton's field either. But I think there's tools that the planning board has, and Frank has hit the nail on the head. It's all about scale. And we listened to him, but then it's like it went right out of our head again.
It did not.
We have that ability in our zoning now. And no one wants to see that type of store.
We actually do not, just to be clear.
But there were some people that didn't want to see a large 93 hotel in the field off of our commercial road, the one commercial road in the town. And a lot of people said, yeah, it's an okay location, but not with the safety. And then there were some people said, we just don't want to see it anywhere in town. And I get that. They said that with Home Depot that was proposing in the commercial zone on the south end. No, help me out here, behind Kirk's. So I get that, and I really don't like the big stores either. I try not to go in them. I like to go into small owner-operated stores if I can. So we can't let the boogeyman of box stores going all over Plymouth when we know that they primarily go where the exit is. And maybe there's other tools that can help us with that.
Special exception.
I hear you.
Special exception. It's like made for this,
Yeah.
honestly.
It's all about scale.
Hi, Claire McCann. I think the only way to do what you're talking about is the special exception and to make those changes. I feel like there's so much contradiction in some of the things you say. It's kind of baffling because at one hand you want to protect things and then the other hand you don't want anything to change. But the way things are, they're not protected. That's an inherent contradiction in the logic. I do think that maybe a couple of these could be special exceptions and not just negated entirely. However, without that control of the special exception, you have no options. And this is giving you options and a way to control that scale that you keep coming back to that has not been forgotten this evening. So I do think we can move forward with a lot of these, and then a lot of the nuance can come later, and it is not taking away from what there is. It is also protecting future generations. And just because someone owns a vast majority of land in the ag zone doesn't mean that they're not beholden to the experience of the entire community. So I really do think that these are protections that strengthen our entire community and the future of this town.
So here's what I'm thinking at this point. I would like to have 2 public hearings, and it seems like the easiest way to do that would be to have one in December and January. I would love to just put this up for a public hearing. If we need to make amendments to it before the second public hearing, if we want to turn an X into a special exception or something, we can do that and renotice for the second public hearing. And then, if it goes through, let the town decide if they like this or not. If they don't like it, they can just say no.
Yeah.
I agree. I think we should do our best to make this clear and understandable and present it to the town and allow the voters to decide.
Do I have a motion to put this?
Can I say something?
You may.
So, there's a lot of valid points. I understand what everyone's saying. And I do think that these people in the agricultural zone that have been here for a long time and understand it, I think they are willing to work with us in trying to come up with something. I would like to work with them for the next month or so and just sit down, see what we can do, possibly give you some changes, whatever, at the next, whatever, hearing or meeting. I don't think we're out of the realm of possibility of making some changes.
Yeah, I agree.
I think everyone has valid points, but I will say, someone told me today that if we take the time, we'll have a much better document. We'll be able to go forward with this document. So I do think that we need to work with them. I know we keep kicking this can year to year to year. I'm as frustrated as you are, Phil. I get it, because we keep talking about it, but we don't do it. But no one has actually taken the time to sit down with people and say, okay, what do you want to see? What do you want to do? Pull it all together and try to come up with something in common. Because I know we can get there. I know we can do it. It's not rocket science. It's just people having to get along.
So can we potentially put this forward to public hearing and maybe make amendments to it for a second public hearing if necessary.
I'd like to share my concern first as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, the one I'd like to clarify, this is the first time we've discussed this since we just ran through and changed everything. So this is the first
That's
meeting
true.
about this. And it's taken a lot of thought, because when we were sitting here going through everything, I didn't know what I was thinking. I didn't have any input to give. I look at this as anti-commerce zoning, and give me a minute before
No.
everyone's heads roll.
Can you clarify what you mean?
Oh yeah, sure, 100%.
Are you talking about the changes or the existing?
The change. Let me.
That's fine.
There's more to this than just that comment.
Go ahead.
This is against business, and I too think that a Target should not be sitting in the middle of New Hebron Road. But unfortunately, Target is what brings us tax revenue, that brings us more tax revenue than it costs us. Housing does not. We've done a great job with housing the past few years. Everyone knows no matter what type of housing you build, it costs money, right? Businesses, on the other hand, have a more inclined to produce to the tax roll in a positive way. So, changing everything to special exception, I just don't know enough. You said it's almost like getting a variance, which is impossible to get.
I don't think that's true.
No, that's not true.
A variance is almost
is
impossible.
So
very
to
that
No,
part is
that's
true.
true.
I think the
Okay.
special exception is a bunch easier than that.
So,
Much
I don't know enough about the special exception part, where I look at this and say, we're making businesses, we're giving them another barrier to start doing commerce in the town of Plymouth. And this might save the neighbor from having a Target next to them, but in 50 years, when they're like, hey, why did Plymouth drown and die? Oh, well, we stopped allowing business to come into it. So, and I know that's like, yes, you know what I'm trying to say by that, but like, I'm not saying that is it. But so, with that being said, yeah, I think there's a place for business and a place for big box stores, we'll say, we use that example, not to be in this town. And I think everyone on the aggregate primarily agrees where those are. So, like, do I see, like, up Route 3? Like, yes, potentially more, what have we been using? Size, volume, or,
Scale.
Scale, thank you. Yeah, up Route 3, down Mayhew Turnpike. Do I see larger scales that shouldn't have to go potentially through a special exception or more acceptable for those areas? Yes, I actually potentially do. Are there residential houses there? Yes, unfortunately there are. But I think though that's maybe where business should be versus on New Hebron Road, or Walmart on New Hebron Road. Picture that, that'd be awful. So I'm hesitant. I know this is what is like how we need to move this to protect a lot of things, but I'm also extremely concerned with, like, not 10 years down the road, but like 50 years down the road, which can change. But I'm concerned with making it harder to do business in Plymouth. And I know that, and I don't just put that across a broad stroke saying, do business anywhere in the ag zone as you wish. But on the other hand, don't do business anywhere in the ag zone, because the ag zone runs some of these major corridors where that might be more conducive to those types of businesses.
A quick response to that.
Please.
One of them is that we also are considering a slightly different map that expands the places for commercial development.
Right, yeah.
And the second one is the next amendment on my agenda here that I'm like chomping at the bit to get to before we ran out of time is the planned unit development overlay
Yep.
or Tenny Mountain,
Yep.
which could be a huge commercial, if it's successful, benefit to the town.
Yeah.
So I don't think I think we just want to recognize where we want that sort of stuff. And I think the special exception is a great tool to kind of regulate like that scale issue. It might not be perfect, but I think it's probably the best we've got. without writing a bunch of like sub-definitions and like, all of that.
And that's what I'm wondering is.
That might come in the future.
Right, that's what I'm wondering is, should we actually be like getting teeth into this more to be like, look at this? And I'd like to make a suggestion for the what definitions are we breaking up?
Auto service station into,
Oh, here we are on the back. So I'd also like to make a suggestion that fueling station is to include electric vehicles. An auto service station is to include electric vehicles as well. This only talks about fuel, oil, and other propulsion of motor vehicles by fuel. But I think this should include electric vehicles as well. I find it
Doesn't bother me.
interesting why it doesn't. What's that?
Doesn't bother me. I'm good.
so I'm,
Yeah.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
I have a lot of one things, but yeah, go ahead.
I'll be as brief as possible. I think that we are at the precipice of not actually controlling the development of the town to the detriment of the town. I think that the special exception does not choke out business, but steers it to where we want it to be. So that if we are faced with a hotel going where a lot of people in the town do not want it to go, we can say no and actually have legal recourse. I think that we should allow this to go to the broader conversation of the town. And if they want to put it on the voting for March, we allow it to go to vote. If we want to change this moving forward, we can change it moving forward. But I think if we don't take this year to try to protect it at all, we're going to find ourselves ruining our floodplains and having development that we aren't actually happy with. So I'm less cautious because I know that we can fine tune it later, and I really feel strongly that we need to protect what we have before it's too late, because I think too late is much closer than we want it to be.
And so many people in this town have urged us to
Yes.
make some changes.
And that's all I want to say. Thank you for letting me say it.
So,
The process did work, though, for the hotel. I mean, the
Well,
process
it-
worked. The system worked.
Well, no, did the process work or did the process not work?
It didn't,
It
because
did.
we could have been sued.
No,
It-
I
did it
would say
work?
we were on thin ice with that decision. That could have
Really
easily
thin ice.
gone to court and been overturned.
But did it
I
work?
would-
Is
I
a
would not
foundation?
wanna
No,
pan-
answer the question. Did it work? Is a foundation going in over there?
it worked not because,
not.
it
I would
worked,
not want
but
to
not
plan the
because,
future of our town on those
Such a
types of
political answer.
decisions.
Yes or no?
It worked.
Did it work or no?
It-
It did not.
Oh,
it blocked the hotel, but not on the
Why is
basis
that?
of what was written in the zoning ordinance.
That,
disagree.
I just would like to know that a Home 2 Suites is going in next to the Fairfield Inn instead of on that, so.
we know.
All right. Who wants to bring this to a public hearing? I mean, can we,
Yep, I do.
can you wanna make a motion or something? Oh, Molly's,
Maybe I don't.
okay.
I'd like to make a motion.
Yes?
Sue has mentioned that the people that are most affected, the people that have the most history of Plymouth, she would like to work with them and see if we can't put something together to find some overlap. I think that makes a lot of sense. That if something's gonna pass, you need the ag zone folks, which are the majority of Plymouth.
It doesn't mean that we don't take it to public hearing. I mean, I just
No,
would like the opportunity to work.
I would love to get more feedback for our next meeting, and maybe make some changes even before it goes into the final public hearing. But I don't want to just see this stalled yet again for another year because.
So I would like to make a motion that we take the time and have a subcommittee of Sue, myself, and if you would like to, John, join us, or Matt. We can only have 3.
The subcommittee of the planning board, you mean? Yep.
Possibly,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's- oh, yep.
And have a subcommittee that makes the meetings, what's the word?
Official.
Official, yeah. And we study this so that we come up with something that we're all gonna be happy with. Because I think there is gonna be some overlap, as Sue said. So I make a motion that we study this, whether we can try and fit it into this December or not, but we have a subcommittee that meets with the ag zone, and that's my motion.
Can I comment?
If you and Sue and someone else are gonna be on that, I would actually opt that I step down and not be on that.
Well, if it's official, then you can be on it.
Okay.
Question for clarification for his motion.
Go ahead.
You say meet with the ag zone.
Representative, anybody that would like to show up
That's
at a
what-
subcommittee meeting.
Isn't that what a public hearing would be for?
I mean, that's what we're doing tonight.
Yeah. The ag zone people know when the meeting is. You know, and ag zone is a nebulous term. It's not an official term for anything. It's so.
Committee.
No, ag zone is not an official term for a group of people. It's a specific term for a zone in the town. The people in the zone of the town are welcome to come to our hearings and come to a public hearing in order to contribute to any kind of changes.
We have a motion on the table. Is there?
But what I just really want to do, I just want to sit down and meet with these people, whoever wants to. I don't want to get full-blown committee, all this stuff going. Because, I mean, really, I don't think it's going to take long. And if we go ahead and push this forward, at least I can bring changes that we can still make. I mean.
There's going to be a second public hearing.
If it doesn't work,
There's going to be a second public hearing either way. Unless it dies in the first public
Are
hearing.
we discussing the motion, or are we waiting for a second?
I haven't heard a second yet. Okay.
Can I support the idea? So I like Mike's idea about getting in, but I don't like the idea of creating a separate committee.
So I've got an idea here. Joseph, quick question. Our business meeting in 2 weeks. LaFrance is coming in, sounds like?
Preliminary conceptual?
No, we have a site plan application from a proposed hotel development at Riverside Landing 2, and we have continuation of the compliance hearing for Mountain Village Charter School.
So we have, which shouldn't be too complicated, and then we have the.
And possibly Three Lakes.
And we've already approved the site work for the hotel.
So here's why I'm asking this question. Could we have, at our next business meeting, a kind of continuation of this discussion before a public hearing in December, and to get more feedback?
And then we'd still be able to start in December.
Then we'd still be able to start in December.
can I try to get you something to get to Joseph, so he can at least email it to everyone to review first? Is that, I mean.
That could be turned around pretty quick.
I think that would be fine. I don't object to that at all. So, from my perspective, I mean, any individual reaching out to the public for comment, I mean, we welcome that at any meeting.
Exactly.
I mean, I would say.
I would prefer not to delay our schedule. I'm gonna move that we move to a public hearing schedule to comply with the notification requirements to have 2 public hearings before the date. So I think the first public hearing would be at our December beginning of December working meeting.
So you're making a motion for a
To move
public
this to
hearing
public hearing.
in December?
Yes.
At our work session?
Our
Okay.
work session.
Is there a second?
Implicit in that is I'm hoping that we get more feedback from the public and we can incorporate those changes into this public hearing.
So am I allowed to reach out to people, just anybody,
Sure.
to just
Yeah.
get input?
the-
Okay, I
the-
just
the
want to
on- the
make
only
sure I
way-
Don't do it with a quorum of the planning board.
The only limitation is.
that?
Don't do it with a quorum of the
Yeah.
planning board.
Oh, don't worry about that.
But otherwise,
Don't worry about
That was my
that.
only concern is like even members of
Avoid
this
that at all
board
costs.
can't violate the right to know raw, so yeah.
but otherwise, yeah,
We
absolutely.
talked about that. before.
Okay.
By all
I
means.
just want to make sure I,
Am I allowed to second his motion or no?
You're not seated.
Actually, no, you're not seated tonight,
That's
no.
what I was asking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody want to second that motion?
6 seated members, right?
yes.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, second. There a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I would like to, so we're talking about a hearing coming up, and what would be proposed for that hearing? Are we talking about, with all these X's and all the changes that are currently on this sheet right now? Because that starts us pretty far from the finish line.
I think it sounds like we're going to start with this, understanding that we're going to have a second public hearing, and who knows what might happen before then. But at the very least, keep the process going, meeting statutory requirements, and if things change before a second public hearing, they can change. But at least, like, let's not drop the ball on this yet again. Let's keep the process moving forward.
Try to,
And-
try to get something, so, try to get people together to try to figure out what's gonna work for everybody.
Mike, from my perspective, I'm perfectly willing. If we want to change some of these not permitted to special exceptions, yeah, let's, so we had.
But that's for
we
another
started
hearing,
this at
yeah.
our last meeting, and we put this out for discussion. We're getting feedback. Like, let's continue this discussion.
It's really on our first meeting
Right.
discussing it.
Right. I'm okay with that.
I do want to let the board know, and I let Joseph know that we were meeting. We did have a meeting of some of the principals of the Ag Zone Committee of Plymouth.
Great.
And there was a lot of feedback. We got, I think the meeting was like an hour and a half or so, maybe a couple hours. And there was a lot of good discussion. And scale came up quite a bit. There is, there's a diverse opinions. And there's probably not a lot of people that really want a box store on New Hebron Road, or I wouldn't be for it personally. But it doesn't mean that I may not want it on a commercial throughway. Right, but what we're talking about.
No side conversations, please.
Commercial
And
zone. So I would like to let the board know there could be some overlap. But if we rush it, it's at the detriment of.
you know, and there's always a possibility, as we've done in the past, to pull something. And be,
Exactly.
you know,
And I give you a lot of credit, John. I give you a lot of credit, and I have for a fair share of what you do, that you are open. And so, again,
but let's keep the process going. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? It's 9 o'clock. We have, like, it's our first zoning amendment. All right. All in favor? Aye.
Right.
Opposed? Okay, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it, yeah, Joseph?
That was
Yeah.
four.
Okay.
4 in
Um,
favor. So we
Okay,
have,
so this continues to public hearing in December. Thank you all for the fruitful, thoughtful discussion. Now to get through like a few more of these. So next up
Here's a select board alternate.
is the Tenny Mountain Overlay District. So a few words on this before we jump right in. So the goals here, as I kind of hinted at a moment ago, is to encourage development of Tenny Mountain into a multi-season resort, and to promote other commercial and residential development beyond that as well, and to facilitate that with the tremendous help of Barrett Planning Group, and especially Judy Barrett. We have a overlay district ordinance here that follows a planned unit development model, which basically means if a developer wants to come in to do something, we have a little bit more flexibility than our zoning typically allows, but in return for that, we have guardrails in place that mean that A, they can't just do whatever they want, of course, but B, they have to come to us with a vision and a plan, and not a bunch of kind of piecemeal development. And in return for coming to us with a vision and a plan to discuss of a broader scale of development, with minimum acreage and all of that, we allow them a little bit of kind of greater leeway with some of our typical zoning that we have in town. And we've had some discussions already about some of the guardrails that we are trying to put in place here, about view sheds, about scale, about size of buildings, and the village core idea, kind of a dense village core versus some looser development outside of that. And that's basically what we're talking about here. And it's a complex ordinance, but it's also incredibly well-written, and and I think could be a real benefit to development in the Tenny Mountain area. In addition to saying that, in your packets, hopefully you've had a chance to look at this, there was some feedback as well from Stephen Kelly and the North Country Development Group about, as the largest stakeholder at this point, about their kind of thoughts about what we have proposed.
What page is that on in the packet?
That's towards the end, it's the last few pages somewhere. It looks like this.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So Tom Newcomb's.
This copy.
So,
Has an impact study been done to that area?
not to my knowledge. If we do a development of this sort as an overlay, and by the way, an overlay in this area does not preclude the use of any of the underlying zoning. All of that is still in place. None of that is taken away or changed. It just means, in addition to that, you have this other option. I should have mentioned that. I think any large-scale development that comes through this process, we will study some of that as part of that process. We haven't done that prior to getting the development proposals. But I think it could be an important part of that process for sure.
This is a huge area,
Yeah.
It is.
and it's,
Did you read the proposed area from them?
What is it?
It is from Rumney,
Yeah,
the Rumney town line,
yeah.
down to the Groton town line
For the PUD overlay?
for the overlay.
Yeah.
On both sides.
Big.
That's a lot of.
Is
I mean,
it Groton on the south
We can define it
side?
to be more
Of UP?
concise if you think it's
Yeah.
I
important.
don't know, I don't know
think
if I
that-
have an opinion on it the second, but it's just a big area.
It is. It is.
Some of my bigger concerns about their proposals.
Oh,
There's Judy.
Hey, hello. You have actually hung in through all of this.
I did. Just to be clear, I have not mapped this district yet,
Okay,
because I was looking for direction from the board.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you for hanging in there.
Thank you, Judith.
Is there something we want to talk about specifically from the chair, or can I just kind of riff on some
Well,
of
I
the
just
ideas?
want to say something quickly about
Okay.
the memo we got. I mean, my own personal thoughts in the memo. There's some, excuse me, there's some stuff in there about like purpose statements and stuff, which I don't think are that big of a deal to change some words here and there. I also don't think they're really all that impactful necessarily. There's some stuff about, where's my big, where I said like no, oh, there it is. Minimum PUD tract size.
Yeah.
From 100 to 10 acres. For me, this is just a straight up no.
Yeah.
But I'm willing to listen to others on this. Similarly with, there was the size of the, I forgot where that went,
The village core?
the village core within that, which seemed to be too large. Oh, there it goes.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, so some of the village core stuff, trying to expand village core and allow more, which I also kind of personally would want to push back against,
It's
to
pages.
allow that large of an area of intensive development.
So, just, I'm understanding something freshly right now. There's a difference between the minimum overall tract size for a PUD and the minimum size where then a village core would be allowed to happen. So if there was a PUD proposed that was 100 acres, a village core would not be allowed in that tract size, because it says that you have to have a tract size of 250 acres in order for then a village core to be proposed.
Yes, and that's my understanding, and
Yeah.
Judy, you can correct us if we're wrong. And it makes, to me, that makes sense.
It does.
If you want to do something that's really intense,
Yes.
dense development,
Yes.
you need to come up to us with a big piece of land and a big master plan of that piece of land in order to make that feasible. Not that you just pick up a small piece of land and start doing really intensive
Right, because then you could end up with a Tenny Mountain where you have like 10 different scattering spot villages.
high density.
Of high density
Yeah.
across the
That
acreage,
seems
which is not
problematic.
what we want, yeah. That was the main, I was thinking a lot about the village core and the minimum size of the PUD, and this proposal from the developer about reducing the minimum tract size allowed in order to have a village core. And I feel strongly that we need to keep the minimum tract size at least at 200 acres in order to allow a village core to happen. And I mean, I'd love to see a village core happen. I think having the housing and the hotel and the density of the residents or the stays should be concentrated in an area in order to preserve much of the rest of the tract.
Yeah. For recreation or whatever. purpose.
Yeah. I'd be interested in the idea of increasing outside residential development with lower density to something like 10% of the tract as an exchange, or
Say that last part again.
so if the tract is 200 acres and the village core, or let's say 250 acres, well, 200 is easier. The village core can be no more than 25% of that 200 acres. Is that correct, Judy?
I believe that is what, yes, it is. That's
Yes,
correct.
thank you. So we could potentially add in a detail about, okay, so that would be the only place in the PUD where residential development or hotels would be allowed to be developed. Only that village core. So potentially there's room to allow less dense development in a small area for things like single family or townhouse, that kind of thing. So that if the developer wanted to make workforce housing nearby a commercial development of some sort, they wouldn't be just limited to just the village core. But we could really speak very specifically about how much of the tract we're willing to allow to be less dense residential.
So at 25%, we are looking at
50 acres,
50 acres on 200 acres.
correct.
And then allow a little bit more on the outskirts than what is proposed.
Or wherever they feel it's allowed. I would recommend no more than 10% of the tract be allowed to have less dense residential. I'm happy to hear Judy's thoughts on that because she's the professional. But those were just some of the thoughts I had in response to this memo and looking more deeply into the PUD.
I mean, if the board wants to provide for some other, policy framework around housing, that's fine. I mean, what I was trying to do in this was create an overlay district within which someone could do a ski resort and not do any housing. Which is essentially what the overlay is. The PUD is a piece of this. One does not have to do a PUD
Yeah.
to take advantage of the overlay. They would do a PUD to be able to take advantage of greater intensity of development and the ability to do housing.
Right. So,
And they only get to the housing if it's part of a village core development.
so
And they can still just do regular ag zone housing as well.
Yeah.
If it's not part of the PUD.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I would love to incentivize a developer to do a PUD on Tenny Mountain Highway, generally speaking. And so I'm trying to think of the ways to incentivize the developer to buy into doing a PUD. Because it does seem like from the history that I've heard from Sir Michael and other people who live in that area, Tenny Mountain has had a hard time becoming viable, and it seems like a PUD is one way we can really help make it viable. And so incentivizing the developer to buy into it would be great. So I think that you know, these little details about height restrictions or easing height restrictions or allowing for more density.
And it should be remembered that, you mentioned height.
Yeah.
I think we came to a kind of tentative quasi-agreement at our last discussion.
Yeah.
That we were willing to consider like 40-80.
Yeah.
Like 40 outside the village core and 80 within the village core.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the developer wants to push for a little bit more. I'm not sure if we really need more than that.
I don't think we need more than 80. If you look at the images that were collected in our packet, you know, the Riverwalk Resort in Lincoln is 7.5 stories, which is probably about 80 feet.
Right.
And
That seems like plenty.
they are,
That's big.
when you go by those, it feels very large.
I don't think we need to go higher than that.
I don't think we need more.
Yeah. So we're still kind of on the same page with that?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah? Great.
I mean, so this is a complex document. I think it's been very well written, and we've started to vet this. Come back to the whole momentum thing. I don't want to rush anything through that's complicated. And at the same time, I think this is pretty well written, and I look at some of the changes that were proposed by, again, who would be the principal developer taking advantage of this most quickly, and I'm not necessarily all that comfortable with most of them. Some of the like rewording of like purpose statements, like whatever, like fine, I don't know, it matters one way or another. As far as greater height, not really. As far as, for me at least, it sounds like we have some consensus there though. As far as smaller than 100 acres, I kind of say no.
No.
Or greater village core percentages, probably not. And there's something about terraced heights which can get really complicated, and I think would almost guarantee us pushing this off for another year because there would just be too much to get our heads around. And I don't know that's really necessary. And I mean, we've had this for like several months at this point, and I think we've gotten some good feedback and given Joseph some feedback. And I think there are some changes that might need to be tweaked about like definitions to kind of align better with our own zoning ordinance. But with those changes and some of the things we talked about at our last meeting, I wouldn't mind just kind of seeing this go forward. And if we wanted to tweak it again another year, we can. But it sounds like Judy did a lot of due diligence in checking out other like models of what this could be, and it looks really thorough and well written to me. Complex, but like when you get your head into it, it's I think pretty good. And if we want to do some residential stuff, I mean,
Just sweetening the deal.
It's actually not that complicated. It's really not that complicated. It is a ski resort overlay district
yeah,
with a provision for a PD that would allow housing under pretty controlled circumstances. That's really what it is.
I'm saying it's a lot of language to get our heads around, but I think at the base level, you're right. It takes a lot of words to get there, though, and rightly so.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So I would agree with John that we've been looking at this for probably a year or more. We've been talking about an overlay for Tenny Mountain.
And that's part of the HOP program, actually, in fact, already.
It was the tail end of it
Yeah.
that we started talking about an overlay. And I give a lot of credit to Judy. She's very professional and listens to the people. And I just want to throw out a question to the board and see, because originally I was thinking the overlay was to help Tenny Mountain become successful, the ski mountain, not Tenny Mountain, the mountain, but the ski area to become successful.
Ski and four-season recreation in general.
Yeah, skiing, whatever else they can come up with to run a great four-season business, not just the winter. And I love that idea. And then we had a hotel that was going into a field, and I think Field Mountain, and everybody's like, yeah, we can't destroy that field with 98 small little rooms in a large building. And then all of a sudden now, we're talking about a mountain that has maybe more significance than a field. I don't know, because there's so few, there's only one like that, besides Plymouth Mountain maybe. But yet, we're so quick and so ready to develop hundreds of acres, maybe a few thousand acres potentially with what we're talking about, with high-density housing and development. Yet, we were concerned about a 98-room hotel in a field. So I just wanted to throw that out and see what.
If I can, to that end, I think one of our big discussions at our last meeting was two things we wanted to add to this. One was professional design review.
Mm-hmm.
And sending it out for design review.
Mm-hmm.
And the other was a consideration of view shed as part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And we seem to have some kind of tacit agreement about that at our last meeting, I think.
Potential impacts.
And impact, yeah. And I mean, I hear a lot about wanting like more tax revenue and stuff, and here's an opportunity for a big commercial development, but a controlled one where we have all sorts of guardrails in place, and it seems like a great opportunity. This mountain has struggled for decades, and maybe this could be a tool that could help that mountain thrive again.
Yeah. And it wouldn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
May I respond to?
No. Yes, you go. Yes.
Okay. The comment you just made, it kind of made it sound like the thousands of acres that are up there would be housing, and the PUD would prevent that from
How
happening.
many acres is this overlay that we're talking about, Judy?
We have to
haven't fully defined that
We have
yet.
to define that. Yeah.
I mean, are we talking a minimum of like 3,000 acres? We talking a minimum of 5,000? Because then we talk about. Go ahead.
Mike, when I can come up there again, which I was hoping to do tonight, but I'm at a conference, we're gonna put a map out on a table, and we're gonna draw this district.
Yeah.
Because I've heard so many iterations of what it should be that I said, I'm gonna give you guys a concept for how this could be done, but I'm not drawing the boundaries right now because I don't know that I have clear direction.
You want to go? Do you want?
No, you can go.
So I was wondering if we're talking about 250 acres to a chunk for the
Minimum.
250 acres at a chunk, to be able to do this 25%
Village
hub,
core.
village,
Core.
what's it called? Village
Core.
core.
Village core.
So theoretically, it wouldn't be just one core, it could be multiple. So this could be 25% would be 50 acres, maybe 75 acres in this core, 75 acres in this core, all highly developed, just 25% of each 250 acres. It could amount to 1,000 acres or more of highly developed housing and commercial and industrial and manufacturing. I just don't know, I can't wrap my head around what could happen to Tenny Mountain. And then if that did all get built out and happen, the chances of a Les Otten coming to Plymouth and developing it as a ski area it just probably may never happen at that point.
Who's Les Otten?
He's so he owns a lot of ski areas out west.
Okay.
Here, I mean, I should know more about the guy, but.
Sunday Rivers. Thank you.
To respond to that, I mean, let's say we pass this. We're not going to get someone developing, I would imagine, 10 of these in 1 year at like 500 acres a pop. The chances of that are like, yeah. If, let's say, like, best case scenario or worst case scenario, we got a few of them, and it seems like it's going to be too much. We could always pull it from the zoning and say, like, that's it, we're done. Like, and I say that, and I this seems like a really well-written tool, and I don't think we'd have to do that. And I wouldn't expect that to happen. And this sounds like an apocalyptic film of some sort, of something that doesn't normally happen in real life, what you're describing. And I don't expect that to happen overnight in Plymouth, even with this, being passed. Yeah?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Judy.
I'm not in the room, so I can't tell when
Yeah.
someone's going to speak. I think I know what Mike is concerned about. The provision for the PUD can be tightened up so that it's integrally connected to, a ski recreational facility or a, four-season recreational facility. So you almost can't even get to the PUD submission to the planning board without that kind of in place. I need to think about how to do that a little bit more, but Mike, if that's what your concern is, that you end up with just 100-acre pockets or 250-acre pockets of places with housing and no ski facility, I think that's something that could be resolved in the text of the ordinance. I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Well, it's scary. It really is.
And it just turns into a series of office parks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want
Or
that.
housing,
Yeah.
dense housing, and I don't think that's what Plymouth wants in our town. It's like a major hotel 3 times the size of the 98 one, all over this beautiful mountain
Yeah, no, we don't.
that we're trying to protect.
Just bear in mind, they don't get the PUD without planning board approval.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just keep that in mind. This is not they don't just get to come to you with the project. They have to get through the PUD process first. So you do have that control. But Mike, I understand what you're saying. I think that there's a way to tweak this a little bit to get at what you're saying. But I would just say, really, the most important thing is we need to be clear what the boundaries of this are. And I've just heard so many different iterations of what Tenny Mountain, the Tenny Mountain area should be, that I just said, I'm going to try to get the concept down on paper for the zoning, but I'm not drawing the map, because I think that needs to come from you guys.
Well, when the HOP committee was talking about this, and I think some preliminary planning board meetings, we had talked about potentially starting it in the roundabout area and going to the border in the other direction, that direction, and going up the mountain, and maybe not going on the other side of the road. And I know there was some concerns about going on the other side of the road. You can always put it there, and if nobody wants to use it, they don't have to use it. And the question would be how far to go there. I'm wondering if we can come up with a preliminary map maybe right now, and then we can look at it at a public hearing, and then we can always tweak that map for a second public hearing.
Just
to have something to look at, though.
Just to put a bookend on the area, I just mapped out kind of a little bit to the east of 3A, from the traffic circle down to the south end of town, and there's about 3,000 acres in that space. If we were to include all of it, 3,000 is the number we'd be looking at in that area.
So 3,000 raw acres that you could
Yeah,
pull out
that-
250
that's basically,
acres.
offset a couple hundred feet to the right of 3A, from the traffic circle all the way to the south end of town on 3A, that whole area to the left, that's about 3,000
So,
acres.
and we have to think about, there are homeowners there,
Yeah.
and, we have homeowners there that may not want that type of development in their backyard or in the field across from their house, or they don't want that type of development.
That's
And
true.
they've worked very hard throughout their life, their time here in Plymouth, to prevent that around their home.
And we can consider that when we look at a proposal that comes in and how that might integrate with that. And there are buffers in place as well. And maybe they wouldn't be enough for that homeowner, who knows? But there are buffers in place at the edges of the development to prevent some of what you're talking about. And if we got one, we could look at if that was enough or not, and for that particular homeowner or whatever.
So there's also kind of, right now that's all ag zone, and so really any of that development could happen as the zoning exists right now.
Not any of it.
Well, not any of it, but a lot of it. Under the current zoning, right?
1 acre zoning, if you can fit in, you fit the slopes and then if you can fit in your sewer and water. But,
Or like, like an office building could be built there under current zoning, right? Yeah. So,
but it's not tall structures
Right.
and not giant buildings.
right, right. So I think this is, I don't know, it feels like it's tied into the question of where do we want development to happen? And it seems like the master plan said that we do want this type of development to happen around Tenny Mountain Highway. And we don't want it to happen in other parts of the ag zone.
Can I,
So hence the overlay idea.
can I clarify one thing?
Sure.
Tenny Mountain, the corridor along Tenny Mountain Highway, or are you talking
I'm talking about-
around 3A
I'm
and
talking
Tenny
the
Mountain?
3A Tenny
It's
Mountain.
actually Mayhew, yeah, not Tenny Mountain Highway, but
It's Mayhew what?
Turnpike.
Mayhew Turnpike.
Or 3A?
Or 3A, yeah.
Yes, I was intending to be extremely clear. The 3A Tenny Mountain
Yeah.
area,
Okay.
not Tenny Mountain Highway. Although Tenny Mountain Highway is clearly also industrial or commercial. So, anyway, that was.
And one other piece to keep in mind, you know, and John, you alluded to this, the definition section, that would be one where, starting on page 5, going on to page 6, nothing that is huge, but there are a couple of definitions that aren't defined in the new definition section or in current zoning, so you may want to. Sorry?
A few tweaks.
Yeah,
That we
may
could
wanna
trust
think about.
you to kind of work out, or maybe work out with Judy or something.
Yeah, we could work on that.
That'd be great. Is the design review and view shed analysis integrated into the language already?
No.
Okay.
No, it
so
needs
that-
to be added.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think it hurts us to at least move forward to the hearing phase with this. Nothing about going to hearing means we're putting this to voters. It's just moving it on to the next phase of discussion.
Yeah.
If at any point we feel like this is not fully baked, we can choose not to put it to the
Yeah.
voters.
We didn't really adopt anything from their suggestions, correct?
We did not,
No.
no. And frankly, if we start digging into that, I mean, there's some things I think we all just rejected outright. If we dig into some of the more complex things in there, we're definitely not getting it through this year. And maybe that's okay. I'm not certain, I mean, Frank, I looked at it and there were some things that I said, personally, there's something that I said no to. And I think we agreed on some of those. There's some things like the terraced heights and stuff. It gets
Going
very
by the-
complicated, I think
the line of the
unnecessarily
roof.
so. And then there's like changes to the language of our, like the mission of this, and I'm like, kind of neither here nor there, that's not really that impactful.
Just want to double check it.
I mean, that's my own thoughts on it, if anybody else found anything else.
No, I didn't really, nothing really stood out in review
Yeah.
of that said, oh, that's,
If Stephen Kelly or someone else wants to come here to a public hearing and make the case, we can listen.
Yeah.
All right, motion? Maybe, no?
should we see if anyone
Oh, does anybody want to speak to this at all? Sorry.
can? All right.
Shocking. Claire McCann. Is there a way, Judy, to talk about how far up a slope something could be built? Because I think maybe part of this also is how high up along the mountainside, because if we do want to preserve the view,
I think that's the view shed part.
is that the view
Yeah.
shed? Is that very specific, or is that kind of up for interpretation, and should it be up for interpretation?
It's not written at this point.
Okay.
It's not written now. It's a fair question, which I'm happy to put some thought into. It's just not in here now. I would think we were
'Cause I'm just
focusing more on
remembering-
pardon me?
Because I know we were talking about heights of buildings, but I do think that does make a difference when you go up the slope and how
It does.
that
It does.
interacts with the general scenery for people living in the
In
area.
fact, we got a picture from a
Absolutely.
member of the public
Right.
for our last meeting about, I forgot exactly where it was, a large building on top of a hill.
Really?
And that this is what we don't want in Plymouth.
Boone, I
And in
think.
fact, we don't want this in Plymouth, and we've,
we
like, been
we
talking
talked
about that.
Yeah, I think there's broad consensus that nobody wants an 80-foot building on top of
Yeah,
the ridge.
absolutely.
A river walk on the ridge.
Is it Taco Bell? Because I'm just kidding.
Let's lay that out and say nobody wants that, right?
We got that out.
Megan brought up a great point. It's
On record, I
the
agree.
views. You know, it's so neat when you go up into the Jackson, New Hampshire area, and you get up onto some of those hills, and you look into this quaint, beautiful little town, and you see the church steeple, and you just see that beautiful, nice little close-knit community. And that's amazing from the top of the ski area.
By the way,
of hills to see.
have you seen the news about Black Mountain? We're not gonna talk about it, we don't have time to talk about it. But it's really interesting news about Black Mountain, which had shut down and is coming back online,
Wow.
potentially as a co-op going long term.
Interesting.
And then I can just imagine getting up on top of Tenny Mountain and not just looking at the bottom buildings of Tenny Mountain and not just seeing the community of Plymouth, but seeing all this housing from the top of the mountain. And
We could control the amount of housing with the
yeah, I mean,
community.
we got controls. Yeah, buffers, and you can only do 25% of your 250 acres, but you're going to be looking at all those scars throughout and the people that are living there that want to continue to remain there didn't move there. They moved there for the space and the serenity around them. So we've got to realize we're losing something to gain something.
Right.
Well, I think we're only losing it if we don't address the concerns that you've raised. And I'm willing to try to put some more work into this. I've just been wanting direction, frankly.
I would love, if you want to call me, Judy, email, we could toss some things around together. If that's okay with the chair?
All right, I like your tentative map, Phil.
No, I mean,
He was just giving us area.
It was not a proposal, it was simply just, this
No,
is
you know,
the upper limit.
As a tentative map, I think we could bring that to a public hearing and then see where we wanted to redraw to make it more permanent.
All right.
I think we need something to start with, and
I
we can
just
always
wanted to
change what we have to start with.
To a big, to the upper limit of the area we'd be talking about.
And just to make sure, to have a rough idea of where that's gonna be from the board, at least, because
Right.
that will be important, and it will also make a difference for notification purposes.
Mhm.
So we will wanna be able
Oh,
to
that's right,
determine
yeah.
how many properties are in
Right.
it, to whether it goes over a certain threshold.
Oh.
But, again, it can, as long as there's enough to go off from that, we can work
Yeah.
from there.
So are you
So
looking
what
for-
would you like me to do?
I think John is waiting for a motion from the board,
Are we looking for a description of the map, though,
or
too?
are you just trying to get us to go?
I would love it.
Do we need to define this before we go to move it to the public hearing?
I think it would be good to have a preliminary map before we go to public hearing, and then we can always change it at our first public hearing. At least it gives us something to work with. And then we can know that's too much or whatever, and then we can pull it back.
What's the boundary for the commercial ICD? Is it 300 feet north of Tenny Mountain Highway?
Well, that's one we discussed.
what you
It-
discussed.
it
Okay,
is
I'm
not
gonna
gonna
propose a map that starts at a line 300 feet to the east of Mayhew Turnpike, Route 3A, and includes all the land to the west of that line, so it would include 300 feet on the right side of Route 3A and all the land in Plymouth to the west of Route 3A. So north to south, everything west of 3A, and including, so look at 3A, go 300 feet to the right, and everything from the left of there is going to be in that zone, just for a discussion, to start the map.
You're on 3A, you're looking south towards Newfound Lake.
No, I was looking at a map zone, looking north.
Okay, so you're looking north.
So
from Newfound Lake.
let me define it by direction.
Direction,
Thank you.
yeah.
300 feet to the east of 3A and all the land to the west of there,
To the town border.
I propose
within the town of
500 feet to the east. And see
I was going with 300 just to keep it consistent with the ICD district.
so the ICD is a little over 300 on the north side.
Yeah.
And then half a mile on the.
Well,
So,
I was
you know,
picking 300 because we're using
Let's go with 300. If we want to change it to 500, we can always do that.
Yeah, Matt, if you want to go
It's
to
nine-
500,
it's
let's go
9:43.
to
I want to
500.
push to 1,000, see what people say.
You know what? I'm looking forward to developing a commercial district on my property then, so.
Right, yeah.
All right.
Taxes get to go up.
I don't object to that. I mean, if you want to propose big to start the conversation, do you want to go 500 feet to
Let's
the
go
east?
500. I'm
Okay.
curious
All
to
right,
see what.
so,
let's see what
so
the
I will
input
amend
is.
my map to say
500 feet
all the land within
3A.
500 feet to the east of Route 3A, and all the land between that line and, all the land to the west of 3A, and all the land to within 500 feet to the east of 3A.
Sounds good.
North-south from boundary to boundary.
Boundary, yeah,
All right. and-
Boundary of
see how
the
people feel.
town or
Yeah.
Route 25?
no, the town,
Town.
just to throw it out there.
All right.
So
So,
it would include the traffic circle and the bit of Plymouth that goes out towards Rumney, just for discussion's sake.
can we get a motion? No, that was just a map.
That was a proposal for a map.
So that Judy can give us something to
Let's get-
start with.
Let's get a whole motion to have that map and the HUD with the overlay, with the proposed changes, including design review and view shed, heights at 4080, and all the things that Joseph probably has in his notes and can get to Judy. Definitions and all of that.
Yeah, those are my notes, are
So
all
moved.
definitions.
So moved.
Thank you.
Can I have a second?
We'll wait for a second.
Yes. Okay. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
I heard Joseph say he had her in his notes. so-
Abstentions? Okay.
Staying.
Thank you, Mike. So the motion passes. That will go to public hearing. And with our 15 minutes, I'm going to try to be quick here. I just want to think, we're hard to be quick. Do we want to move forward with the inclusionary zoning ordinance? I'm going to try to be quick about a little bit of a preamble here. We heard some support. We also heard some reticence about this. And I would throw out there that unlike many inclusionary zoning ordinances in other states, by New Hampshire law, it is an extra tool and it's not mandatory. But if somebody wants to use that to gain extra density, they can by having affordable, so-called affordable housing in their development, gaining a little bit of a bonus of some density to do so. I will add to this discussion briefly that part of your packet included a housing champion designation. And this is one of the things that scores us extra points. And the benefit of being a housing champion, which we can talk about if we want to apply for that, is that it opens up funding for infrastructure from the state. And this gets us one step closer, if we pass this, to making that checklist. In addition to just being another tool in the tool belt of developers, if they want to use it. And if they don't want to use it, they don't use it. Are we interested in putting this forward, which we have discussed in the past, through public hearing?
I think it would be worthwhile to move it forward to public hearing.
Others? So we have two non-seated members who want to push it to public hearing.
Classic.
So glad that we're.
In talks I've had trying to discuss it with people and explain it to them, they said I'm not against inclusionary zoning, but I do ask why we're giving bonuses to that. They're like, so they were like for the inclusionary zoning, but they were not for bonuses.
Otherwise, people aren't going to use it.
Yeah.
And we can't mandate it. And we probably don't want to mandate it because it actually can actually prevent housing going
Well,
in.
and that's what it boiled down to. So it's incentivizing
It's
it.
incentivizing it. Yeah.
That is
Could-
why.
A developer's, their goal is to make as much money as possible, you know.
And if they want to use it, great, and if they
Is that what
don't,
it is?
fine.
Well,
So, with the, you know, they're not gonna do low, you know, affordable housing.
Yeah.
oh yeah, no.
So, how do we feel?
Mike,
Like,
So I've made myself somewhat clear on this, and I know that June Hammond chimed in at one point that it could potentially make a lot of extra work on the town to keep track. You have to keep track of these inventory properties
You actually don't.
throughout your town.
There are other organizations that can do that for
Other
us.
organizations that would be coming out, possibly not even from Plymouth, something like Laconia Housing Authority, that would be running it, determining occupancy. And I do want to let the public know that we have a mechanism that allows income-based housing in Plymouth. It works, and the landlords provide the homes for them, not necessarily a house in some cases, but it is allowed. They all approved, and I've had a number of them over the years. It's a great way to have a great neighbor, and but it doesn't specifically go with a particular house in perpetuity. It might be a property that has someone that needs a little helping hand for a while, and then it might be someone else the next year.
And this taxpayer subsidized, as opposed to
This is
This.
market-based.
I have heard that there has been, from someone that works with it in another state, secondhand, I heard that there is concerns that the folks that buy in to one of these homes and then sees their neighbors buying for 200,000, selling for over 400,000, they go to sell theirs thinking, oh, all right, I'm gonna cash out, and then realizing they're not making that money. There's no nest egg for them to all of a sudden sell and make that profit. And it's not always clear to them. It makes them feel a little upset and angry that they've been living in there all this time and they don't get to participate in the increase like their neighbors.
Well,
So they do get confused. Some people more confused than others that are not used to the buying process and the real estate process.
two things. I would mention two things. One, the alternative might just be not being able to afford a house, and two, being, and Habitat deals with this all the time. The value of your property will likely still go up, and you will likely still be able to sell it for more. It just won't be the market more that you might be looking for. But as home prices go up and as the median income goes up and all that kind of stuff, all these numbers will increase, and you will still be able to sell it for more probably, but not the market version of more.
Yeah, to support that, real estate values have been going up faster than wages, but if real estate and wages track together, there would be no discrepancy between somebody in one of these houses, what they would be able to sell their house for, and what somebody on the market would be able to sell their house for.
In terms of
because
rates
it
of
tracks the
appreciation.
wage,
And I guess I'm kind of
area
old
median
school.
income.
I'm kind of old school because you can, it wasn't that long ago, you could buy a dirt cheap house and put sweat equity into it. Something was falling down and you have some skills, and then all of a sudden, over the years, you've built that up, and there's no one saying you can't make the full measure off of it when you go to sell. And I guess I've always looked at it, I'd love to increase the amount of housing in Plymouth so that people can afford it. And I've seen communities like Claremont, and it wasn't that long ago that I drove through Claremont and I saw plywood over windows, building after building after building after building. And things go in cycles, just letting you know.
So, Mike, keep in mind the other thing that's happening nationally is there's a lot of investors who are buying into housing, and like they're pushing the prices up too, like to the
And
point
I would
where-
love to see something that could fix that too.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not happy
I
with
agree,
that at all.
I agree.
So-
But, there's big money that see value.
Plymouth
of real
is not
estate.
gonna solve that.
It's not.
And our
but-
zoning ordinance is not gonna solve that tonight.
Zoning ordinance could solve that.
Good, I agree.
So, do we or do we not want to push this forward? And do we not want to extend our meeting beyond 10 o'clock? It's 9:53. Hopefully not too far if we do.
I would love to see, and I know I would love to see this held off for a year and just continue to look at it. That's my feeling.
I mean, for me, it's another tool that someone can use or not use, and added benefit, if we do become a housing champion, which is a possibility, we could actually get like infrastructure money.
There's so many grants out there for this town. When our old town administrator was running, he got grant after grant.
And it's another tool for us to look at.
The money's out there.
Do we want to? I don't know.
I would rather, honestly, I think this is a good idea, and I'm okay with it. I would like to give us another year of seeing the impact of the zoning changes that we put in last year before we make too many more changes. I think we have a lot going on already.
I agree.
I appreciate all the work that's been done on this already. I'm okay with this not moving forward this year.
Fair enough. All right.
You know how I feel, so I won't say it again.
Our two non-seated
Motion
members.
we pass on this for a year at least.
I don't think we need a motion for that. do we?
Probably don't really, but okay. It sounds passed. Okay. It is 9:55. Do we want to have a motion to continue for a few extra minutes?
How many items do we have on the agenda?
What do we have
for-
I think we have some quick ones, I hope.
We are,
There's nothing complicated.
we have quick session on the housing champions.
Can I move, I don't think our working meeting, I don't think our next hearing is actually gonna take that long. I think we have the school coming back, and if we hear from them, that could take time, but I suspect we might not hear from them.
Can I just say, we have commercial storage facilities, auto service stations in the VC, and mandatory parking changes by statute.
My suggestion is that I'd like to put these on the agenda for the public hearing and pick them up after the hearings, if there's time before 10 o'clock. It's your agenda, you have the call, but I think we can.
I don't have the call to extend this. Or I have the call to put it on our next meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would be okay. I mean, I wonder if we just get through these like 3 quickly, maybe or not.
I know we've got proposed changes for, the commercial districts that are
Yeah.
gonna take some discussion.
Storage facilities. No? Well, we have 4 minutes left.
All right, you're in charge of the gavel, sir.
How do we feel about storage facilities?
Let's-
And regulate.
Motion, we go 5 minutes over the clock.
How about if, I'll make a motion that we handle storage facilities as long as it takes so that we can finish that item.
We finished that item.
Okay.
I take back my motion for 5 minutes every time.
I'll second your motion. We take care of the storage facilities.
Okay. All right.
I promise not to drag.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So storage facilities, do we want to, they're in here somewhere, proposed language, I think.
Just before the Tenny Mountain overlay.
Oh, there it is. Actually, it's right on my page, right here. Which would create a separate use for storage facilities, so we could regulate them separately, and then allow them by special. I'm in the wrong page. Where am I?
Add commercial
There
storage
it is,
facility
okay.
as a permitted use in the ICD zoning district. Add commercial storage facility as a use permitted by special exception in the highway commercial and the ag zoning districts.
Thank you. No, I was on the wrong page. I was like, where is this?
Is it right before the housing champion designation?
No, it's right before the Tenny Mountain overlay.
Oh.
I would move that we
Oh.
move this forward as proposed to include a definition of storage facilities, commercial storage facilities to be defined as a building or series of buildings or units which are leased or rented to the public for use as storage space, and to amend the Article 3, Section 3 or 4 table of uses to include commercial storage facilities as permitted in the ICD and a special exception in the highway, commercial, and ag zoning districts. Motion.
Second.
Okay, further discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, the motion passes. We'll put off the other ones for our next meeting.
When you say next meeting, do you mean next work meeting?
No, our next business meeting.
Okay.
And that still gives time to publicly notice for the hearing in December, right, Joseph?
I was just counting that, yes, so that does give us enough time, based on my quick count, to notice.
Okay.
As long as we decide on them that day, of course, if
Okay.
not, then no.
We need to have like language in place.
Yeah, unless you wanted to put off the hearing until
Yeah, okay.
January. instead
Yeah,
of
we
December.
could, I mean,
Okay.
if we don't
So-
have the language in place, we could do one hearing.
We could,
technically,
yes.
But it just doesn't give us room to change the language
Exactly.
of people's.
All right.
But as stands right now, 3 hearings scheduled for the first Thursday in December, so the upcoming work session meeting, which are commercial uses and ag zone, which are Tenny Mountain Overlay District and commercial storage facilities, as
All
it
right.
stands.
Thank you. So we'll look at the other two at our next meeting. Are there any public comments? Thank you all for sticking in out or wherever. I can't even talk anymore.
Excellent.
All right.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, we are adjourned.